Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the suffocating dust cloud of a medieval caravan, where the romanticism of the Silk Road evaporates the moment you realize there's camel spit in your breakfast and your feet are already bleeding before the sun fully rises. You're about to discover why those merchant adventurers in history books deserve way more credit than we give them, because honestly, you probably won't survive past lunch. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing how far these bedtime stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's approximately 4:30 in the morning, and you're being shaken awake by a merchant whose breath smells like fermented mare's milk and whose patience expired about 2 hours ago. You didn't actually sleep. Not real. You've been lying on rocky ground wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket that some historians suggest was probably infested with lice within days of being used on the road. Welcome to caravan life, where the concept of dawn departure is less poetic sunrise moment and more chaotic scramble in near total darkness. You stumble to your feet, and immediately you're struck by the noise. Modern you is used to alarm clocks, maybe some birds chirping, the distant hum of traffic. Medieval caravan you gets a full sensory assault. Camels roaring their displeasure at being loaded, merchants shouting in 3 different languages you don't understand, the clatter of wooden crates being stacked onto pack animals, and somewhere in the darkness, someone's definitely having a very public argument about whose turn it is to carry the extra water skins. The pre-dawn caravan camp is basically a medieval mosh pit, except everyone's armed and nobody's having fun. Here's something they don't tell you in those sweeping historical documentaries. Caravans departed early because they had to maximize travel during cooler hours, but early meant different things depending on the season and route. A caravan crossing the Syrian desert in summer might start moving at 3 a.m. to avoid the midday heat that could literally cook you inside your own clothes. Winter caravans through Central Asia might wait until there was barely enough light to see the trail, because leaving in total darkness was a fantastic way to lose half your animals down an unseen ravine. You're learning this the hard way as you trip over a tent rope someone forgot to coil, nearly face-planting into a pile of camel dung that's still warm. The camp itself is being disassembled with alarming speed around you. Those romantic paintings of elaborate tents and leisure? Forget them. Your shelter for the night was basically a lean-to made from a piece of canvas stretched between 2 sticks, and it's already being yanked down by a merchant who rolls his eyes at your sluggishness. In the actual historical record, we know that most caravan traders traveled incredibly light. Every ounce of weight that wasn't trade goods was wasted profit. Your comfort was literally eating into someone's bottom line, which means you got the absolute minimum required to keep you from dying and therefore becoming a problem that slows everyone down. You're expected to pack your own meager belongings: a wool cloak, that lousy blanket, maybe a small bag with some personal items, and you're already doing it wrong. You're folding things. You're trying to organize. The merchant assigned to keep you alive, barely, grabs your stuff, rolls it into a chaotic ball, and stuffs it into a saddlebag while muttering what you're pretty sure are medieval insults. Efficiency trumps neatness every single time on the road. You're learning that the hard way, along with about 50 other unspoken rules that everyone assumes you already know. The animals are the real stars of this pre-dawn chaos, and they're all having the worst morning ever. Camels, those supposed ships of the desert that romantic travelers loved to write poetry about, are actually temperamental drama queens who protest everything. The one being loaded near you is making a sound like a dying accordion mixed with a very angry old man, and its handler is responding by hitting it with a stick while singing what might be encouragement or might be threats, you can't tell. Historians still argue whether medieval caravan handlers actually loved their animals or just tolerated them as expensive, necessary evils. But watching this interaction, you're leaning toward the latter. If you're on a Silk Road caravan, you're dealing with Bactrian camels, the two-humped variety that can carry about 400 pounds and survive on minimal water. They're biological miracles, sure, but they're also prone to spitting, biting, and kicking, sometimes all at once if you approach wrong. You watch a seasoned handler approach his camel from the side, making clicking sounds, moving with this careful dance of familiarity. You try the same thing with a camel near you, and it immediately tries to bite your arm. Welcome to animal husbandry, medieval style, where the animals have zero interest in being your friend and every interest in expressing their displeasure at 5 a.m. labor. The loading process itself is an art form you're completely unprepared for. Goods have to be balanced perfectly on both sides of the animal, or the whole load shifts during travel and causes injury. You're watching merchants and their servants arrange heavy bundles of silk, spices in sealed clay jars, metalwork wrapped in leather, all positioned with mathematical precision. One side gets a 40-pound bundle of fabric. The other side gets balanced with what looks like bags of grain or maybe stones, whatever achieves equilibrium. You're asked to help, and you immediately make everything worse by placing a heavy jar on one side without considering the weight distribution. The camel, sensing the imbalance, starts its protest roar again, and you're pulled away from the task before you cause an expensive disaster. Around you, the social hierarchy of the caravan is becoming painfully clear. The caravan leader, the Karwanbashi, if you're traveling through Persian-influenced regions, is the one guy who isn't rushing around like his hair's on fire. He's conferring with what looks like his lieutenants, probably discussing the day's route, water sources, and potential dangers. These leaders were typically experienced merchants who'd made the journey dozens of times, and their word was absolute law on the road. Challenge his decision, and you'd find yourself left behind at the next settlement. If you were lucky, the historical record from medieval travel accounts, like those of Ibn Battuta in the 14th century, makes clear that caravan discipline was military in nature. Hierarchy wasn't a suggestion. Then there are the actual merchants, the guys who own the goods being transported. Some are traveling with their own caravans. Others have paid for space in this collective journey. They're supervising the loading with hawk-like attention because every piece of damaged merchandise is money evaporating in the desert heat. You notice one merchant examining every knot, every rope securing his goods, paranoid about theft or damage. This isn't unfounded paranoia. Caravan theft was common enough that medieval Islamic law, for instance, had extensive provisions about liability for lost or damaged goods during transport. Trust was a commodity as valuable as silk. Below the merchants are the handlers, drivers, and general laborers, the guys actually doing the physical work. Some are hired hands, paid a pittance plus food. Others might be enslaved people, a grim reality of medieval trade routes that historical records don't always emphasize in those romanticized adventure tales. Their job is brutal. Manage the animals, load and unload goods, set up and break down camp, stand guard duty, and generally ensure that wealthy merchants never have to break a sweat. You, as a modern time traveler trying to blend in, are definitely in this category. which means you're about to learn what actual manual labor feels like without ergonomic equipment or labor laws. There's also usually a spiritual figure, maybe a mullah on an Islamic caravan, a Buddhist monk on routes through Central Asia, or a Christian priest on European trade routes. Their job isn't just spiritual comfort. They're also mediators, keeping peace between different ethnic groups and religions all crammed together in this traveling pressure cooker. You spot what might be a religious figure blessing some of the animals or maybe just praying for a safe journey, and it strikes you how much faith played into these ventures. Without GPS, weather forecasts, or communication with anyone outside the caravan, you're basically throwing yourself into the void and hoping God or fate is feeling generous. The sky is starting to lighten now, a pale gray creeping across the horizon, and the pace of activity somehow intensifies even further. The caravan leader shouts something, and it ripples through the camp like a starting gun. This is it. You're moving out, except you're not on a camel or horse. Unless you're wealthy, which you're definitely not in this scenario. You're walking, on foot, for the next 12 to 15 hours. Hope you stretched. The caravan begins to move, and it's nothing like a neat line of travelers you might imagine. It's more like controlled chaos, a straggling column that stretches back for what looks like half a mile, with faster animals and impatient merchants near the front, slower pack animals and foot travelers bringing up the rear. You're somewhere in the middle, already eating dust kicked up by the camels ahead of you, and it's barely sunrise. The rhythm of travel is immediately established. The creaking of leather, the constant shuffle of feet and hooves, the occasional shout when someone's load starts slipping, and underneath it all, the sound of dozens of people breathing, coughing, and muttering to themselves. Your modern body is already protesting. You've walked maybe 15 minutes, and your feet hurt. Those historically accurate shoes you're wearing may be leather boots if you're lucky, or more likely some kind of wrapped cloth footwear held together with cord provide almost no cushioning. Each rock on the path transmits directly into your heel. There are no orthopedic insoles here, no moisture-wicking socks, just leather or cloth, maybe stuffed with straw if someone was feeling generous, standing between your skin and the ancient earth that doesn't care about your comfort. By the time the sun is fully up, you'll have blisters. By midday, those blisters will pop. By evening, you'll be walking on what feels like raw hamburger meat. And guess what? You get to do it again tomorrow, and the day after that, for weeks or even months, depending on your destination. The dust is another thing entirely. It's not just dirt, it's this fine, invasive powder that works its way into everything. Your nose, your throat, your eyes, under your clothes, into your hair. Within an hour of walking, you're coughing regularly, trying to clear your lungs of grit. Some of the experienced travelers have wrapped cloth around their faces, covering their nose and mouth, and you're starting to understand why. This isn't fashion, it's survival. The historical accounts from travelers like Marco Polo mention the dust storms and difficult breathing conditions on routes through arid regions, but reading about it and experiencing the reality of walking behind 30 farting, dust-kicking camels for hours are very different things. And then there's the smell. Oh, the smell. Dozens of unwashed humans who haven't bathed properly in weeks, mixed with animal musk, leather, dung both fresh and dried, spices leaking from imperfectly sealed containers, and the general funk of life without deodorant or regular laundry. It's a wall of odor that you physically walk into every morning, and your modern nose, used to soaps and perfumes and general cleanliness, is staging a revolt. But here's the thing. Everyone else seems completely unbothered. This is just what people smell like when they're working. You're the weird one for being grossed out. The sun breaks fully over the horizon now, and you realize with sinking dread that this is just the beginning. You haven't even gotten to the heat, the thirst, the monotony, the constant fear of bandits, or the fact that you desperately need to pee but have no idea what the protocol is for that in a moving caravan. The day is young. Your feet are already screaming, and you've got maybe 20 miles ahead of you before you're allowed to stop. Medieval caravan travel isn't an adventure, it's an endurance trial that people undertook because the profit potential was worth risking absolutely everything, including their lives. You're about to understand, step by painful step, exactly what that risk felt like. The first hour of walking is almost tolerable because your body is still operating on optimism and the novelty of the experience. By hour 2, reality sets in with the force of a camel kick to the chest. Your feet, which started the morning merely uncomfortable, have now crossed into active rebellion. Each step sends a sharp reminder that human feet were not designed for this kind of punishment. At least not modern human feet that have spent their entire existence cushioned by Nike technology and paved sidewalks. The shoes, and let's be generous by even calling them that, are medieval torture devices masquerading as footwear. If you're on a Middle Eastern or Central Asian caravan, you might be wearing something like simple leather slippers or boots with minimal structure, maybe reinforced with extra layers at the sole if you saved up money or knew what you were doing. European caravans might offer you turn shoes, where the leather is sewn inside out and then flipped, creating a moccasin-like construction that molds to your foot over time. The problem is, over time means weeks of breaking them in, and you don't have weeks. You have right now. And right now those shoes are creating friction points at your heels, your toes, and that weird spot on the side of your foot you never even knew existed until it started screaming. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually had tougher feet or just higher pain tolerance. But archaeological evidence from skeletal remains shows significant bone stress and deformities in the feet of people who traveled regularly on foot. Your feet aren't just hurting, they're being fundamentally restructured by the demands you're placing on them, and your body is not happy about this rapid renovation project. You can feel the first blister forming on your right heel, a hot spot that's progressing from uncomfortable to genuinely painful. You try to adjust your gait to compensate, which immediately creates new pressure points on your left foot. It's a losing game of podiatric whack-a-mole. The pace of the caravan is relentless in a way that's hard to appreciate until you're living it. You're not strolling. This is purpose-driven movement, probably somewhere between 5 to 3 miles per hour when the terrain cooperates, which doesn't sound like much until you realize you're maintaining it for 10, 12, sometimes 15 hours with only brief stops. The caravan leader has calculated exactly how many miles need to be covered to reach the next water source or caravanserai before nightfall, and that calculation doesn't include extended breaks for your comfort. Medieval caravans operated on the principle that daylight was a finite, precious resource. Once the sun set, travel became dangerous and nearly impossible, so you used every available hour of light to cover ground. You try to find a comfortable rhythm, matching your steps to the person in front of you, but it's harder than it looks. The terrain keeps changing. Hard-packed earth transitions to loose sand or gravel, then to rocky patches where you have to watch every footfall to avoid turning an ankle. Each surface change requires a different walking technique, and you don't know any of them. The experienced travelers shift their gaits instinctively, but you're stumbling through each transition like a newborn giraffe learning to walk. Someone behind you sighs dramatically at your clumsiness, and you feel the social pressure of holding up a line of people who have zero patience for your learning curve. Around hour 3, you notice something alarming. You're already exhausted, but nobody else looks remotely tired. The handlers are chatting casually. The merchants are conducting business discussions while walking, and even the other laborers seem to be conserving energy in ways you haven't figured out yet. That's because they're not fighting their bodies theory working with them. Medieval people who traveled regularly developed this efficient, ground-eating stride that minimized energy expenditure. They weren't taking gym-bro power walks. They were practicing the art of sustainable movement, something humans did naturally for thousands of years before cars existed. You, with your modern sedentary lifestyle and office job posture, are wasting probably 40% more energy than necessary, and your body is sending you the bill with interest. Your legs are burning now, specifically your calves and the fronts of your thighs. Modern, you might walk to your car, around an office, maybe on a treadmill for 30 minutes if you're particularly motivated. Medieval Caravan U is walking 20 to 30 miles today, and your muscles are absolutely not prepared for this shift. The lactic acid buildup is making your legs feel heavy and tight, and you're only a quarter of the way through the day. There's no sports drink to replenish electrolytes, no protein shake waiting at the next rest stop. There's water if you're lucky, and you'll drink it gratefully from a leather skin that tastes like the inside of a cow. Speaking of water, you're getting thirsty, and this presents an immediate problem. The caravan doesn't stop for individual water breaks. There's a system, and you're expected to know it already, but of course you don't. You watch other travelers drinking from skins slung over their shoulders or attached to their belts, taking small sips periodically without breaking stride. You don't have your own water supply dependent on communal resources, which means waiting until someone in charge decides it's time to drink. This is actually a calculated survival strategy. On routes where water sources are far apart, rationing is strictly enforced. Drinking whenever you feel thirsty could deplete supplies before reaching the next well or oasis, which could literally kill everyone. Your modern brain, used to hydrating freely, is having a hard time accepting that you're thirsty right now but can't drink yet. When a water break finally happens around mid-morning, it's not a break at all. The caravan just slows slightly, and a handler starts making his way down the line with a large skin, offering drinks. When it reaches you, you grab it eagerly and start chugging, which immediately earns you angry shouts. You're supposed to take 2 or 3 small swallows. That's it. You've just consumed what was meant for 5 people, and now you're the selfish foreigner who doesn't understand caravan etiquette. The handler snatches the skin back, muttering what you're certain are creative curses about your parentage and intelligence. You've been walking for maybe 4 hours, and you've already violated social codes you didn't know existed. Everyone around you looks at you with a mixture of annoyance and contempt. Welcome to group travel in an era where individual needs are subordinate to collective survival. The sun is climbing higher now, and with it comes the heat. If you're crossing desert or semi-arid regions during summer months, which many caravans did because winter routes could be impassable, the temperature is steadily rising toward genuinely dangerous levels. By midday, it might hit 100, 110, even 120 degrees Fahrenheit in some regions. Your clothing, which seemed heavy and uncomfortable this morning, is now your only defense against the sun, but it's also trapping heat and sweat against your skin. Medieval travelers understood that covering up was essential. Exposed skin would burn and dehydrate you faster, but they didn't have modern moisture-wicking fabrics. You're wrapped in wool or linen, and it's becoming a portable sauna. The sweat is pouring off you now, soaking into your clothes, and you can taste salt when it drips from your forehead into your mouth. You're losing fluids at an alarming rate, and that rationed water sip from earlier suddenly seems criminally insufficient. Dehydration is setting in faster than you realized. Possibly your mouth is dry, your head is starting to ache, and you're feeling slightly dizzy. The experienced travelers are sweating too, but they're managing it better, having learned through repeated journeys exactly how much exertion they can sustain in these conditions. You're redlining your system because you don't know where the limits are, and by the time you figure it out, you might already be in medical trouble. Here's a fun historical detail that's about to become very relevant to you. Medieval travelers didn't have sunscreen. They had head coverings, face wraps, and long sleeves, but if any skin was exposed, it was getting the full force of UV radiation without SPF protection. Your modern skin, used to 5 minutes of sun exposure before you retreat inside, is being absolutely demolished. By this afternoon, your face and neck will be bright red and painful. By tomorrow, they'll be peeling. By the end of the first week, if you survive that long, you'll have either developed a deep tan or a permanent sunburn depending on your melanin levels and luck. Some travelers used oils or animal fats on their skin for minimal protection, but mostly people just suffered through it. Your feet, remember your feet? They're in crisis now. Those blisters that started forming in hour 1 have definitely popped, and you're walking on raw skin that's getting rubbed repeatedly with every step. The inside of your shoes is probably slightly damp with blood mixed with sweat, creating a perfect environment for infection in an era before antibiotics or even basic antiseptic practices. Some medieval travelers carried extra cloth to wrap their feet when blisters got bad, but you don't know this trick yet, so you're just enduring. Each step sends a sharp pain shooting up from your heel, and you find yourself unconsciously limping, which of course creates new strain on your knees and hips. Your entire kinetic chain is being disrupted by your body's desperate attempt to avoid pain, and you're essentially falling apart from the ground up. Around what you estimate is hour 6, though time has become fluid and meaningless in this hell march, the caravan finally stops for what passes as a lunch break. You nearly collapse with relief, except break is a generous term for what actually happens. The caravan doesn't fully halt. It just slows to a near stop while people eat standing up or sitting briefly on the ground before being hurried along. You're given maybe 15 to 20 minutes before movement resumes. This is strategic. Stopping completely means animals lie down and become difficult to get moving again. Loads need to be rechecked, and precious daylight burns away. Better to keep minimal momentum than to lose an hour restarting everything. The food at this break is not what your modern palate was hoping for. You're handed a chunk of hard bread, and when I say hard, I mean fossilized, dense, probably baked weeks ago specifically to last on the road without spoiling. You try to bite into it and nearly crack a tooth. The trick, you learn by watching others, is to soften it with water or spit, turning it into a soggy mass you can chew. Tastes like cardboard with hints of grain and disappointment. There might be some dried fruit if you're lucky, or dried meat that's so salty and preserved it's basically leather. This is fuel, not food. Nobody's enjoying it. You're all just taking in calories to continue functioning, and your modern taste buds, used to flavor and variety and actual seasoning, are deeply offended. Your legs are trembling during this brief stop, muscles vibrating with fatigue and the sudden absence of movement. You try to sit down fully, and someone immediately warns you not to. If you sit completely, your muscles will seize up, and you'll be in agony when you have to stand and walk again. So you sort of half sit, half squat, in this awkward position that provides minimal relief while keeping your legs semi-engaged. The experienced travelers are doing calf stretches, rotating their ankles, performing these little maintenance routines they've learned through trial and painful error. You try to copy them, but your body is so tight and fatigued that stretching almost makes things worse. Then, before you're remotely ready, the caravan leader gives the signal, and everyone's moving again. Your body stages a genuine protest this time. Your legs don't want to straighten. Your feet send sharp pain signals with the first few steps, and your back, which you hadn't even realized was hurting, suddenly makes itself known with a deep ache. This is the afternoon shift, the hardest part of the day, when the sun is at its peak. Your energy reserves are depleted, and you've got potentially 6 to 8 more hours of walking ahead of you. You want to cry. Actually, you might be crying, but it's hard to tell because your face is already wet with sweat, and tears feel like just another fluid your dehydrated body can't afford to lose. The afternoon stretches out with a monotonous brutality that breaks something in your modern mind. There's no entertainment, no podcast to listen to, no music to mark the passing time. Just walking, and more walking. Your entire existence narrows to the next step, and then the next, and then the next. You try counting steps to pass time, but you lose track around 800 and can't remember if you should start over or keep going. You try thinking about home, about comfortable beds and air conditioning and cars, but that just makes the present moment more unbearable. Some travelers are singing or chanting. You catch rhythmic verses in languages you don't understand, probably traditional travel songs meant to maintain morale and mark the pace. You try to join in, but you don't know the words or melodies, and you're too exhausted anyway. Your posture has completely deteriorated by now. You're hunched forward, shoulders rolled in, head down, shuffling more than walking. This is exactly the wrong form for efficient long-distance travel. But you're beyond caring about efficiency. You're in survival mode, just trying to last until the caravan stops for the night. The person behind you keeps bumping into you because you're slowing down without realizing it, spacing out in this exhausted fugue state. They snap at you in whatever language they speak, and you try to speed up, but your body has very limited additional gears available. Here's something that hits you around hour 10. You've walked farther today than you normally walk in an entire month. Maybe several months. Your step counter, if you had one, would be celebrating some kind of apocalyptic achievement. Your body, however, is not celebrating. Every system is in crisis. Your cardiovascular system has been working overtime all day. Your muscles have depleted their glycogen stores and are probably starting to break down muscle tissue for energy. Your feet are a disaster zone of blisters, blood, and structural damage. Your skin is sunburned and chafed from clothes rubbing repeatedly in the same spots. You're dehydrated despite the small amounts of water you've been allowed. You might be developing heat exhaustion without even realizing it. Headache, the dizziness, the nausea could all be warning signs, but you just assume this is what walking all day feels like. The sun is finally starting to descend. Thank whatever gods are listening, but you're not done yet. The caravan leader is pushing to reach a specific stopping point, maybe a known campsite with good water access. Maybe the walls of a caravanserai if you're lucky enough to be on a route that has them. You've got maybe 2 more hours of walking in the growing coolness of evening. which should be relief but actually makes your abused muscles tighten up even more. The temperature drop that feels so good on your sunburned skin is making your body want to shut down and rest. But you can't. Not yet. The caravan stops when the leader says it stops, and not a moment before. When the word finally comes down the line that you're making camp for the night, you feel a wave of relief so intense it's almost euphoric. You've survived day one of walking. Your feet are destroyed. Your body is broken. You're sunburned and dehydrated and possibly borderline delirious. But you made it. Except you quickly realize that reaching camp doesn't mean rest, it means a whole new set of tasks begin. And your day is far from over. But at least the walking has stopped. And in this moment, that's the greatest mercy you can imagine. You've barely caught your breath from the day's march when you realize with crushing disappointment that arriving at camp means it's time to eat, and medieval caravan cuisine is about to destroy whatever appetite you thought you had left. Your stomach is growling. You've burned thousands of calories today and consumed maybe a handful of dried bread and mystery meat, but your modern palate is completely unprepared for what passes as dinner on the road. The cooking setup is primitive in ways that would make even the most hardcore camping enthusiast weep. There's no camp stove, no cooler full of pre-prepped meals, no foil packets of seasoned vegetables. Instead, you're watching handlers build fires using dried camel dung as fuel. Yes, dung, because wood is scarce or non-existent in many caravan routes, and you use what's available. The historical record confirms this was standard practice across Central Asian and Middle Eastern trade routes. Dried dung burns hot and relatively clean, but the psychological barrier of knowing your food is being cooked over feces is something your modern mind struggles to overcome, even though it's actually more sanitary than you'd think once properly dried and burned. The main meal of the evening is some kind of stew, and stew is being extremely charitable. It's more like hot water with things floating in it, things you can't quite identify in the flickering firelight. There might be some grain barley or millet, probably that's been carried in sacks and is now being boiled into submission. There are chunks of what could be meat, except you're not entirely sure what animal it came from or how long ago it died. Medieval caravans did sometimes travel with live animals for fresh meat, but more commonly they relied on preserved provisions. Dried meat, salted fish if you were on certain routes, or jerky-like preparations that could survive weeks or months without refrigeration. You're handed a wooden bowl, your personal eating vessel, that you're expected to keep with you and clean yourself. Though clean by medieval standards means maybe rinsing it with water if water is plentiful, or just wiping it out with cloth if water needs to be conserved. The stew that gets ladled into your bowl is lukewarm at best, because with dozens or even hundreds of people to feed, there's no way to serve everyone while the food is still hot. You take your first spoonful, and the taste is, well, it's not good. There's no real seasoning, or if there is, it's so minimal you can barely detect it. Salt, maybe. Some herbs that got thrown in more out of tradition than flavor consideration. The texture is simultaneously mushy and gritty. The grain is overcooked into paste. But there's also sediment and grit from imperfect washing or just the general dust that permeates everything on the caravan. Here's where you learn an important lesson about medieval food preservation. The reason everything tastes so aggressively bland or unpleasantly strong is because these foods are designed to last, not to delight. That dried meat in your stew, it's been salted to within an inch of its molecular life, making it so preserved that bacteria can't touch it, but also making it taste like you're eating the Dead Sea. The grain might have been stored for months in less than ideal conditions, picking up flavors from whatever it was stored near animals. Spices, general mustiness. There's no quality control, no food safety standards, no health inspector shutting down operations because the food was stored at unsafe temperatures. You eat what's available, and you're grateful it's not actively poisonous. Some caravans carried slightly more variety depending on their routes and resources. If you're traveling through regions with access to dried fruit dates, figs, apricots, you might get those as supplements. These are actually the highlight of caravan cuisine. Concentrated sweetness that provides quick energy and breaks the monotony of grain mush. But fruit is valuable and often reserved for merchants or sold at destinations. So as a lowly laborer, you're getting the bare minimum. Maybe you'll see an onion get chopped into the communal pot, and that counts as a vegetable for the next week of meals. Maybe there's some lentils mixed in with the grain. Maybe, if the caravan leader is feeling generous or you're near a settlement, there's actual fresh bread instead of the fossilized road rations. The portion you receive is calculated with mathematical precision to keep you functional but not satisfied. Medieval caravan logistics operated on the principle of maximum efficiency. Every mouth to feed was a drain on resources, and resources had to last between resupply points that might be weeks apart. You're getting enough calories to walk tomorrow, but you're not getting enough to feel full, and certainly not enough to replenish what you burned today. You'll go to sleep hungry, wake up hungry, and exist in a state of constant low-grade hunger for the entire journey. This is just normal. Historical accounts from travelers like Ibn Battuta describe the careful rationing and often insufficient food supplies that characterized long-distance caravan travel. And then there's the water situation, which is somehow even more dire than the food. You're thirsty in ways you didn't know were possible. Your tongue feels thick and sticky, your lips are cracked, and you'd give almost anything for a cold glass of clean water. What you get instead is warm water from a leather skin that tastes like the hide it's been stored in, possibly with added flavor notes of whatever the bag was used for previously. Sometimes the water tastes faintly of sheep or goat, because the skins aren't exactly thoroughly cleaned between uses. Sometimes there's a slightly metallic taste that makes you wonder about the mineral content or possible contamination. You don't think about that too hard, because thinking about waterborne diseases won't change the fact that you have to drink this or die of dehydration. The water sources along caravan routes varied wildly in quality. If you're lucky enough to stop at a well-maintained well or an oasis with flowing water, you might get relatively clean water that tastes merely stale rather than actively offensive. But many water sources were stagnant pools, seasonal streams, or wells that served both humans and animals without any separation or filtration. Historians still argue whether medieval travelers had lower rates of waterborne illness due to built-up immunity or just didn't report their constant digestive distress because diarrhea was so common it wasn't worth mentioning. Either way, your modern immune system, used to chlorinated tap water and bottled spring water, is about to meet medieval microbes, and it's not going to be a friendly meeting. Some travelers carried their own additives to make water safer or at least more palatable. Wine or vinegar could be added in small amounts. The alcohol and acidity helped kill some bacteria, though of course they didn't know the science behind it. They just knew from experience that water treated this way made people sick less often. If you were on a route where tea culture existed, boiling water for tea was one of the safest options, though fuel for boiling wasn't always available. You, having shown up to this caravan unprepared and ignorant, have none of these solutions. You're drinking straight questionable water and hoping for the best. The eating process itself is a lesson in medieval table manners, or rather, the complete absence of them. You're sitting on the ground in clusters around the fires, people eating with their hands or crude wooden spoons, no napkins, No plates beyond your personal bowl. People are talking with their mouths full, spitting out gristle or bits of grain that didn't cook properly, wiping their greasy hands on their clothes. It's communal dining in the most primitive sense, everyone sharing from the same pots, passing around bread that multiple hands have touched, drinking from shared water skins where everyone's lips have been. Your modern germophobia is having a complete meltdown, but you're also too hungry and exhausted to maintain any standards, so you find yourself doing exactly the same things. There's a social element to mealtime that you're struggling to navigate. People are forming groups based on ethnic backgrounds, languages, or business relationships. The merchants are clustered together, discussing trade and politics. The handlers are sharing stories and jokes you don't understand. The religious figures are eating slightly apart, maintaining some ceremonial separation. You don't fit cleanly into any category, so you're awkwardly on the periphery, the weird foreigner who doesn't know customs or language, who messed up the water rationing this morning and is now marked as the caravan idiot. People aren't hostile exactly, just indifferent to your existence unless you actively cause problems. One of the handlers near you is eating something that definitely isn't from the communal pot, some kind of dried meat he's been saving, chewing it methodically while staring into the fire. This is your first real exposure to the underground economy of caravan life. People hoard better food, trade amongst themselves, engage in small-scale black market exchanges that the caravan leadership probably knows about but ignores as long as it doesn't disrupt operations. The official rations keep everyone alive, but supplemental food sources keep morale from completely collapsing. You have nothing to trade, no hidden stash, no connections to get better provisions. You're stuck with whatever's officially distributed, learning the hard way that wealth and social status determine not just comfort but actual nutrition. As you're choking down your stew, trying to convince yourself it's not that bad, it is that bad. You witness something that makes you briefly grateful for what you have. There are people on this caravan who are getting even less than you. Enslaved individuals or the absolute lowest-ranking servants are eating after everyone else, getting the scraps and dregs, sometimes going without if supplies are tight. It's a brutal reminder that even in your misery, there are hierarchies of suffering, and you're not at the bottom. Medieval caravan life operated on strictly enforced social stratification where your status determined everything from food quality to sleeping arrangements to whether you lived or died if resources became critical. Dessert, in case you were wondering, does not exist. The meal ends when the pot is empty or people stop eating, whichever comes first. There's no coffee, no after-dinner drink beyond more of that questionable water. Some people are smoking pipes or chewing betel nut or consuming whatever mild stimulant or relaxant is culturally appropriate for the region, but you don't have access to any of that either. Your evening entertainment is watching the fire burn down while your body inventories all its new injuries and complaints. Here's a quirky historical detail that's about to become relevant. Medieval travelers had some truly creative approaches to supplementing their diets with local resources when possible. Some caravan routes passed through regions where edible plants grew wild, and experienced travelers knew which ones were safe. Certain insects were considered acceptable emergency protein locusts. For instance, were eaten across many cultures and could be roasted as a crunchy snack. You watch a handler pop something in his mouth that might be a roasted beetle, and you feel your modern sensibilities screaming, but hey, it's protein, and he's probably getting better nutrition than you are with your grain mush. The cooking area is starting to be cleaned up, which means people dumping bowl scraps onto the ground for scavenging animals or just into a communal waste pit. rinsing pots with minimal water, and banking the fires to preserve coals for tomorrow's breakfast. That breakfast, you'll discover tomorrow morning, will be nearly identical to what you just ate, maybe some leftover stew reheated, maybe just more hard bread soaked in water, maybe absolutely nothing until midday if supplies are tight and the caravan leader decides pushing through until the next water source is more important than morning meals. The monotony of caravan cuisine isn't just boring. It's nutritionally inadequate in ways that will manifest as various deficiency symptoms if your journey lasts long enough. Scurvy was a real concern on routes where fresh food was unavailable for months. As you sit there, still hungry despite eating, you realize that food back home, the variety, the flavors, the safety, the abundancious, a miracle you completely took for granted. You've eaten more interesting meals from gas station vending machines than what you just experienced. And this is dinner every single night, for weeks or months, until you reach your destination or die trying. The romance of adventure travel evaporates completely when you're eating mystery stew cooked over dung fires and going to bed hungry while your stomach gurgles ominously, processing water that might give you dysentery. Welcome to medieval cuisine on the road, where edible is the highest compliment you can give, and dreams of fresh vegetables and seasoned meat become the fantasy that keeps you going through one more day of flavorless survival rations. That takeout menu back home is looking like a Michelin-starred restaurant right about now, and you'd commit minor crimes for a single bite of anything with actual seasoning or texture that isn't mushy grain paste or leathery preserved meat. But you won't get it, because this is your life now, and your taste buds will just have to adapt or suffer. You've finished your disappointing dinner, and now your body is sending urgent signals that can no longer be ignored. You need to pee, desperately. You've been holding it for hours because you had no idea what the protocol was during the march, and now it's reached critical urgency. This is where medieval caravan travel strips away any remaining dignity you thought you'd maintained. Welcome to the sanitation situation, or more accurately, the complete absence of sanitation as you understand it. You look around the camp for anything resembling a bathroom, a latrine, an outhouse, even a designated area with some privacy. There's nothing, no facilities whatsoever. You watch other people wandering to the edges of camp, stepping just beyond the firelight, and handling their business right there in the open darkness. No stalls, no toilet paper, no running water, no privacy beyond whatever the night shadows provide. Your modern brain is having a complete crisis trying to process that this is actually how it works. But your bladder doesn't care about your psychological adjustment period. You need to go now. You walk to the perimeter of camp, trying to find a spot that offers at least minimal privacy. Maybe behind a rock or a scraggly bush. In desert or steppe environments, there's often nothing, just flat, open ground extending in every direction. You squat down, hoping the darkness is sufficient cover, and take care of business while feeling more vulnerable and exposed than you've ever felt in your life. There's no door to lock, no walls between you and dozens of other people, some of whom are walking past on their own bathroom missions and couldn't care less about your presence. This is just bodily function, as routine as eating, stripped of all the privacy and dignity that modern plumbing afforded you. The lack of toilet paper is its own special nightmare. Historical accounts and archaeological evidence tell us that medieval people used a variety of materials depending on what was available. Cloth scraps that might be washed and reused, smooth stones, handfuls of sand in desert regions, leaves or grass where available, or in some cases, just their left hand followed by washing if water was plentiful enough. That last option is why many cultures develop strong taboos about using the left hand for eating or greeting. It was the designated unclean hand. You're fumbling in the darkness trying to find something, anything, to use, and you end up with a handful of coarse sand that does the job but leaves you feeling raw and definitely not clean by any modern standard. Washing your hands afterward is a luxury you quickly learn isn't always available. Water is too precious to waste on hygiene when it's needed for drinking and cooking. Some travelers carried small amounts of water specifically for ablutions. Islamic travelers, for instance, had religious requirements for ritual cleanliness that necessitated water for washing. But as a low-ranking caravan member without your own water supply, you're wiping your hands on your already filthy clothes and trying not to think too hard about the fact that you'll be eating with these hands tomorrow. The concept of germs doesn't exist yet, so people don't know why hand washing prevents disease. But and you're watching your own hygiene standards collapse in real time because there's simply no infrastructure to maintain them. Now let's talk about the other bodily function. The one nobody wants to discuss, but everyone has to deal with: bowel movements. You haven't needed to go yet. Your system is probably in shock from the day's exertion and dietary changes, but it's coming, and when it does, you'll face the same complete lack of facilities. Medieval caravans didn't have latrines dug at overnight stops. That would require time and energy that could be better spent on other tasks. People simply walked a bit away from camp, found a spot, and squatted. In the morning, you'd break camp and move on, leaving behind your waste for scavengers and decomposition to handle. This creates a fascinating and horrifying situation where older, frequently used campsites along popular caravan routes were essentially contaminated zones surrounded by months or years' worth of human waste in various stages of decomposition. Travelers tried to choose fresh spots when possible, but water sources were fixed points, so caravanserais and wells saw repeated use despite the unsanitary conditions building up around them. Historians still argue whether the high rates of dysentery and other digestive diseases on caravan routes were primarily from bad water or fecal contamination of campsites and food preparation areas, but honestly, it was probably both working in terrible synergy. The smell around the camp periphery is something you're noticing now that you're paying attention, that distinctive odor of human waste mixing with animal dung from the camels, horses, and oxen that are also relieving themselves wherever they happen to be standing. There's no manure management, no waste removal system. It's all just there, adding to the general funk that surrounds the caravan like an invisible cloud. Your modern nose, accustomed to sewage systems and waste treatment plants that make human waste completely invisible, is being assaulted by the reality that for most of human history, waste was just part of the environment you lived in. For women on the caravan, and yes, there were women traveling for various reasons: merchants' wives, enslaved women, pilgrims, workers. The sanitation situation was even more complicated and dangerous. Managing menstruation on the road meant using cloth rags that needed to be washed and dried discreetly, except there was no privacy and often insufficient water. Women were more vulnerable during bathroom trips to the camp periphery, facing both physical danger from animals or human predators and social scrutiny from traveling in a male-dominated environment. The historical record is frustratingly sparse on these details because most travel accounts were written by men who didn't consider women's experiences worth documenting. But the challenges were undoubtedly significant. Children on caravans, and there were sometimes entire families traveling, added another layer to the sanitation chaos. Infants in makeshift cloth diapers that couldn't be properly cleaned, toddlers not yet trained squatting wherever they happened to be, Young children getting sick from the constant exposure to contaminated conditions. It was a recipe for high childhood mortality rates. And indeed, many children didn't survive long caravan journeys. You're witnessing this reality as you see a merchant's young son squatting near the animals, sick with what looks like severe diarrhea, and nobody seems particularly concerned because this is just what happens on the road. Medical help is non-existent, and you either recover or you don't. Personal hygiene beyond waste elimination is barely a concept on the caravan. Bathing requires substantial water and time, both of which are in desperately short supply. You haven't properly washed since joining this caravan, and you won't for days or potentially weeks, depending on the route. Your body is accumulating layers of sweat, dust, and grime that are forming a sort of second skin. Your hair, if it's long, is becoming matted and greasy. Your clothes are stiff with dried sweat and dirt. You can smell yourself, and it's not pleasant, but everyone else smells exactly the same way, so there's a sort of olfactory equality in the shared filth. Some travelers tried to maintain minimal hygiene standards within the constraints. If water was available, you might do a quick wipe down of your face and hands, more symbolic than effective. Some people changed into slightly cleaner clothes if they had spares, though cleaner was relative, maybe clothes that were only worn for 3 days instead of 5. Combing hair or beards was possible and helped with morale if nothing else. But full-body cleanliness was a luxury reserved for arrival at cities with bathhouses or caravanserais with sufficient water supplies, and even then, you had to pay for the privilege. Here's a detail that's both quirky and disturbing. Medieval people understood that certain conditions required intervention, even without understanding germ theory. If someone had open sores or wounds that were visibly infected, they might be isolated or treated with various remedies, honey as an antibacterial agent, for instance, or cauterization with hot metal for serious infections. But the general filth everyone lived in? That was just normal. The constant mild skin irritations, the rashes from chafing and unwashed clothes, the infected blisters on feet, the lice and fleas that infested everyone's clothing and bedding, these were accepted as part of life, not problems to be solved. Speaking of parasites, you're almost certainly going to pick up some new passengers during your caravan journey. Lice were endemic in medieval populations, especially among people living in close quarters with limited hygiene opportunities. Fleas jumped between people and animals freely. Intestinal parasites from contaminated water and food were common enough that many people had them without even knowing it, just experiencing general digestive discomfort as baseline normal. You're going to start itching in a few days, and it won't be psychological. There will actually be things crawling on you, and your options for dealing with them will be limited to picking them off manually or living with them. The nighttime bathroom situation deserves special mention because it combines all the difficulties of daytime waste elimination with added darkness and danger. You wake up in the middle of the night needing to pee again, the cold, the inadequate hydration, your body's stress responses, and now you have to navigate out of the camp in near total darkness. There might be a moon if you're lucky, but on cloudy nights, you're stumbling over rocks, tent ropes, sleeping people, and piles of who knows what. You're also vulnerable to actual dangers: scorpions in desert regions, snakes, or larger predators attracted to the camp by food scraps and animal presence. There's no flashlight, no lantern to carry. Those are reserved for guards and important personnel. You're making this trip in the dark, hoping you don't step on something dangerous or someone sleeping at the camp periphery who will wake up swinging at the perceived threat. The camp dogs, if there are any, might start barking at your movement, waking others and marking you as a disturbance. You handle your business as quickly as possible and scurry back to your sleeping spot, heart pounding from the combination of vulnerability and disorientation. The psychological impact of this complete loss of privacy and hygiene is harder to quantify but deeply real. Modern you is used to bathrooms as private sanctuaries, places where you can be alone with your thoughts and your bodily functions without judgment or observation. Medieval Caravan you has no such sanctuary. Every biological function is semi-public, rushed, uncomfortable, and insufficient. The constant awareness of your body's needs and the difficulty meeting them creates a baseline stress that never quite goes away. You're always slightly worried about when you'll next be able to relieve yourself, whether there will be adequate privacy, whether you're violating some social norm you don't understand. And then there's the sickness that's almost inevitable. Between the contaminated water, the unwashed hands, the communal eating arrangements, and the general lack of sanitation, gastrointestinal distress is basically guaranteed. You're going to experience what medieval people called the flux, what we'd call dysentery or severe diarrhea, and when you do, you'll be dealing with it while still walking 20 miles a day, still eating the same food that might be making you sick, still sleeping on the ground, and still having no real medical care or relief. People died from dehydration caused by severe diarrhea on caravan routes, their bodies unable to absorb what little water they could take in, and they were buried in unmarked graves far from home. The caravan leadership knows all this. Of course, they've seen people get sick, seen the sanitation problems, but there's no solution that doesn't involve stopping for extended periods or carrying massive additional water supplies, both of which threaten the economic viability of the entire venture. So they accept a certain percentage of illness and death as the cost of doing business. Your health is your own problem to manage within the constraints of caravan life. And if you can't manage it, well, that's unfortunate. But the caravan moves on. As you settle back into your sleeping spot after your nighttime bathroom expedition, you're acutely aware of your body in ways you never were back home. Every itch might be a bug. Every gurgle in your stomach might be the first sign of serious illness. Every urge to relieve yourself requires immediate planning and navigation of social and physical obstacles. The simple biological functions you never thought about are now consuming mental energy and causing constant low-grade anxiety. This is medieval caravan sanitation, not a system, but a complete absence of systems, where you're returned to a nearly animal state of just dealing with bodily needs however you can in whatever environment you find yourself. And you still have weeks or months of this ahead of you. The sun rises with the indifference of a celestial body that has watched countless travelers suffer beneath it, and today it's coming for you specifically. You've survived one day of walking, one night of restless sleep on rocky ground, and now you're facing something you didn't adequately prepare for mentally. The weather is not your friend. In fact, the weather is actively trying to kill you, and medieval caravans had zero protection against its various moods and tantrums. The morning starts deceptively cold, especially if you're traveling through desert or high-altitude regions where nighttime temperatures plummet. You're shivering in your wool cloak that seemed suffocatingly heavy yesterday afternoon, but now feels inadequate against the pre-dawn chill. Your breath mists in the air, and your fingers are stiff and clumsy as you try to pack your belongings. Medieval travelers understood temperature swings intellectually, but that didn't mean they had good solutions. Layering was the primary strategy. Multiple garments of wool or linen that trapped air and provided insulation, but if you were traveling light or poor, you simply didn't have enough layers and had to suffer through it. As the caravan begins moving in the gray dawn light, you're actually grateful for the exercise because it warms your body up. Your muscles, which seized up overnight into painful knots, are screaming in protest at being forced into motion again. But at least the movement generates heat. Within an hour, you're warm enough that the chill isn't bothering you anymore. Within 2 hours, you're starting to sweat as the sun climbs and the temperature rises. Within 3 hours, you're going to deeply regret that you ever complained about being cold. The sun in open terrain desert, steppe, or high plateau is a different beast entirely from the sun you experience in modern climate-controlled life. There's no shade, no buildings to duck into, no air-conditioned car waiting to provide relief. It's just you, the merciless sky, and solar radiation that's cooking you like a rotisserie chicken on the slowest, most agonizing setting. The temperature is climbing toward triple digits, and you're wrapped in layers of fabric because exposed skin would burn and blister even faster than covered skin. You're trapped in a textile prison that's simultaneously protecting you and slowly steaming you alive in your own sweat. The heat does things to your body that you've never experienced in your temperature-regulated modern existence. Your vision starts doing weird things. The horizon shimmers and ripples, creating mirages that look like water or trees or buildings that definitely aren't there. First-time travelers throughout history fell for these optical illusions, wasting precious energy walking toward what turned out to be heat distortions. The experienced caravan members don't even glance at them anymore, but you're still trying to figure out what's real and what's your brain misfiring from heat stress. Your core temperature is rising despite your body's desperate attempts to cool itself through sweating. The problem is you're sweating out fluids faster than you're being allowed to replace them, and dehydration is compounding the heat stress. You're developing a headache that feels like your brain is swelling against your skull. Your skin is hot to the touch, almost feverish. You're getting dizzy when you turn your head too quickly. These are all warning signs of heat exhaustion progressing toward heat stroke. But there's no medic to check on you, no cool room to recover in. You just keep walking because stopping means getting left behind. And getting left behind in this environment means death. Historical accounts from travelers like Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta describe the extreme heat of certain routes in terms that modern readers might think are exaggeration, but they're not. Summer temperatures in the Taklamakan Desert, the Arabian Desert, or the Persian interior could reach 120 to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. And people traveled through them anyway because economic incentives outweighed the very real risk of cooking to death. Caravans lost people to heat stroke regularly. Bodies left behind because they couldn't be carried, and burial in rock-hard ground was impractical. Your modern understanding of heat safety: hydrate constantly, take breaks, avoid exertion during peak hours is completely incompatible with the economic realities of caravan travel that demanded maximum distance covered per day. Then there's the sun exposure on your skin, which is becoming a crisis. Remember that sunburn from yesterday? It's worse today. Your face feels tight and painful, and when you touch your nose, you can feel the heat radiating off it. Your lips are cracked and bleeding because you keep licking them, which actually makes it worse by removing what little protective oils they had left. The skin on the back of your neck, despite your attempts to keep it covered, is turning an alarming shade of red that's going to peel off in sheets within a few days. Some medieval travelers wrapped their heads and faces extensively in cloth, creating crude versions of what desert peoples had perfected over centuries. But you didn't know to do this properly, so you're paying the price. Here's a quirky historical detail about sun protection. Some travelers used various substances as primitive sunscreen. Olive oil provided minimal protection and was sometimes mixed with herbs or other ingredients. In some regions, travelers used thick pastes made from clay or chalk that physically blocked the sun, though these were uncomfortable and made sweating even more problematic. The historical record includes references to face veils and extensive wrapping, but mostly people just endured the sun damage as an unavoidable cost of travel. Skin cancer from repeated sun exposure probably affected many long-distance travelers, though they wouldn't have understood the cause and effect relationship. Around midday, when the sun reaches its peak, the caravan leader makes a decision you're desperately grateful for: a longer rest stop during the hottest hours. This isn't kindness, it's necessity. Pushing animals and humans through peak heat increases mortality rates unacceptably, and dead travelers don't deliver goods or pay for future caravans. Everyone clusters in whatever minimal shade can be created under stretched cloth, beside pack animals, in the shadow of loaded carts if there are any. It's not cool by any means, but it's marginally less exposed than standing in direct sunlight. You collapse in a precious strip of shade created by a camel's body and a piece of canvas someone rigged up, and you realize something terrifying: you've stopped sweating. Your skin is dry and hot, your heart is racing, and you're feeling nauseous and confused. These are symptoms of heat stroke, the point where your body's cooling system has failed and you're in genuine medical danger. In a modern setting, this would be an emergency room situation. Here, you're on your own. An older traveler notices your condition and forces you to drink water. Small sips even though you want to gulp it down. He pours some water on a cloth and drapes it over your head and neck. And slowly, over the course of this extended rest, your body starts to stabilize. You might have just been saved by a stranger's experience-based knowledge, and you didn't even know you were dying. But the heat isn't the only weather challenge you're facing. Medieval caravans often traveled during transitional seasons to avoid the worst extremes, which meant encountering unpredictable weather patterns. You've been focused on the heat, but now, as you're resting in midday shade, you notice clouds building on the horizon. They're dark and towering, and the experienced travelers are looking at them with concern. Weather forecasting didn't exist beyond folk wisdom and observation of natural signs, so every storm was a surprise that could range from inconvenient to catastrophic. The afternoon resumes walking, and those clouds are growing closer and larger. The temperature starts dropping, which initially feels like blessed relief until you realize it's dropping too fast. The wind picks up, and it's not the gentle breeze you were hoping for. It's gusting hard enough to kick up dust and sand that stings exposed skin like tiny needles. You're squinting against the particulate assault, trying to keep dust out of your eyes and nose while still watching where you're walking. The animals are getting nervous, making distressed sounds and becoming harder to control. The caravan's neat-ish line is disintegrating as people cluster together for mutual protection against the wind. Then the rain starts, and you learn that rain in the desert or arid regions is nothing like the gentle showers you know from home. This is a violent deluge, water falling in sheets so thick you can barely see the person in front of you. Within seconds, you're soaked through every layer of clothing. The ground, which was bone-dry moments ago, can't absorb water this fast, so it's running off in streams, turning dust into slick mud that's treacherous to walk on. You're slipping, catching yourself, trying not to fall while also protecting yourself from the stinging rain that's hitting hard enough to hurt. The temperature has plummeted, maybe a 40-degree drop in less than an hour, and now you're wet and cold and the wind is wicking away your body heat at an alarming rate. You're shivering violently, teeth chattering, and you realize you could potentially die from hypothermia in the same place where you were nearly dying from heat stroke just hours ago. Medieval travelers faced this exact scenario regularly, and people did die from exposure during sudden storms. The caravan hunkers down if the storm is severe enough. Everyone clustered together using animals and carts as windbreaks, just trying to survive until it passes. Historians still argue whether more travelers died from heat or cold on caravan routes, but the answer is probably both, in significant numbers. The lack of weather prediction meant you couldn't prepare adequately, and the lack of shelter meant you were exposed to every element with minimal protection. That wool cloak you're wearing is now a heavy, sodden mass that's providing almost no insulation because wet wool loses most of its warming properties. You're learning medieval textile science through suffering some fibers, and weaves handled moisture better than others, and travelers who could afford better quality gear had measurably higher survival rates. The storm passes as quickly as it arrived, which is typical of convective weather in open terrain, but it leaves behind muddy conditions and soaked travelers who have to keep moving because the caravan schedule doesn't accommodate drying off. You're walking in wet clothes that chafe in new and creative ways, creating raw spots that will develop into sores if this continues. Your feet, already damaged from yesterday's blisters, are now marinating in wet boots or shoes, which is going to accelerate skin breakdown and infection. There's a reason trench foot isn't just a World War I phenomenon. Prolonged exposure to wet conditions destroys foot tissue, and medieval travelers absolutely experienced this. They just called it something else, or more likely didn't call it anything because foot problems were so ubiquitous they weren't worth special terminology. As the afternoon wears into evening, the sun breaks through the clouds, and you face yet another weather challenge: steam and humidity. The wet ground is evaporating in the renewed heat, creating this muggy, oppressive atmosphere that makes breathing feel like inhaling hot soup. Your clothes aren't drying so much as remaining damp while you continue sweating into them, creating a perfect environment for fungal infections and skin irritation. The temperature is moderate now, but the humidity makes it feel worse than the dry heat did. You can't win. Every weather condition brings its own special torture. Night falls, and you discover that clear skies after a storm means radiation cooling the ground loses heat rapidly, and temperatures plummet again. You're still in damp clothes, and now you're shivering around a campfire that can't possibly warm everyone adequately. Some travelers are changing into spare clothes if they have them, hanging wet garments near fires to dry. You don't have spares because you're poor and unprepared, so you're sleeping in damp wool, hoping you don't develop pneumonia or any of the other respiratory infections that plagued medieval travelers. The mortality rate from fever on caravan routes included plenty of cases that were probably complications from exposure and weakened immune systems. The wind continues through the night, and it's not the gentle breeze that might help dry clothes. It's cold and persistent, finding every gap in your inadequate shelter, making sleep nearly impossible. You're curled in a ball, trying to minimize exposed surface area, and you're fantasizing about central heating, insulated walls, weather-appropriate clothing, and basically every comfort of modern climate control that you took completely for granted. Medieval people didn't have weather apps telling them to expect temperature drops. They couldn't check hourly forecasts or plan around severe weather. They just faced whatever came and adapted or died. And you're experiencing firsthand how thin the survival margin really was. You're walking through the third day now, still damp from yesterday's storm, when someone near the front of the caravan shouts a warning that sends a ripple of tension through the entire line. You can't understand the words, But the tone is unmistakable. Danger. Every person around you immediately tenses, hands moving to weapons you didn't even realize they were carrying. Welcome to one of the most psychologically exhausting aspects of caravan travel: the constant, gnawing paranoia that bandits are about to ruin your day, your health, or your life. Banditry wasn't some occasional problem on medieval trade routes. It was a persistent, existential threat that shaped every decision caravan leaders made. The routes you're traveling were famous not just for commerce, but for the raiders who preyed on that commerce like wolves following a herd. Historical records from across the Silk Road, European trade routes, and Arabian caravan paths document thousands of attacks. And those are just the ones significant enough to be written down. Countless smaller raids went unrecorded, marked only by abandoned goods, scattered bones, and the stories survivors carried to the next city. The shout that alarmed everyone turns out to be a false alarm, just dust kicked up by wind. Not riders, but the damage to your nervous system is done. Your heart is pounding, adrenaline flooding your body with fight or flight chemicals that have nowhere to go because there's nothing to fight or flee from. You're learning that the fear of attack is almost as damaging as actual attacks because it never stops. Every distant movement, every unfamiliar sound, every dust cloud on the horizon could be raiders, and you won't know until they're close enough to be a real problem. The caravan's defensive strategy, such as it is, would be laughable if your life didn't depend on it. There are guards, sure men hired specifically for protection, often former soldiers or professional fighters who travel armed with swords, spears, bows, whatever weapons are culturally and economically appropriate. But there are maybe a dozen guards for a caravan of 80 people, and those aren't military-grade odds if you're facing an organized bandit group. The defensive plan basically amounts to cluster together, look threatening, hope the bandits decide you're too much trouble, and if that fails, fight desperately while the merchants try to negotiate a reduced robbery. You're now very aware of the weapons around you. Nearly every adult male is carrying something: a knife at minimum, often more substantial weapons concealed in packs or hanging from belts. This isn't recreational. These are tools for survival when the social contract breaks down and violence becomes inevitable. You don't have a weapon because you showed up to this medieval caravan completely unprepared, which means if an attack happens, you're dependent on others for protection, or you're improvising with rocks and sticks like a particularly pathetic action hero. The caravan leader has positioned the most valuable goods in the center of the column, surrounded by people and animals that serve as both shield and deterrent. The logic is sound: bandits have to fight through layers of resistance to reach the best loot, but it also means everyone on the outside of the formation is essentially a human shield. Guess where you're walking? Yeah, near the outer edge with the other low-value personnel, expendable in the economic calculus of caravan defense. If raiders attack, you're in the first wave of people they encounter, and your survival depends on either their mercy or your ability to seem not worth the effort of killing. Here's what bandit attacks actually looked like based on historical accounts and archaeological evidence. They were usually quick, opportunistic strikes rather than prolonged battles. Bandits wanted goods with minimal casualties on their own side, so they preferred overwhelming force or surprise attacks on vulnerable sections of the caravan. If they could isolate stragglers or catch the caravan during river crossings or in narrow passages where formation was disrupted, even better. They'd strike fast, take what they could carry, and disappear before any organized resistance materialized. Professional bandit groups knew the terrain intimately, had networks of informants telling them when valuable caravans were coming, and operated with a level of tactical sophistication that would surprise people who imagine them as disorganized thugs. The psychological warfare was part of their strategy too. Bandits cultivated reputations for extreme violence to encourage surrender without fighting. Stories circulated about groups who tortured resistors, who showed no mercy, who would kill everyone just to make an example. Some of these stories were true. Many were exaggerated, but the terror they inspired was very real and served to make caravans more likely to negotiate or flee rather than resist. You're hearing whispered conversations around you about a particular bandit leader who supposedly operates in this region, and the stories involve creative atrocities that you hope are embellishments but fear might not be. The caravan's movement strategy shifts when in high-risk areas. You're traveling tighter together now, with scouts ranging ahead and on the flanks to provide early warning. The pace has increased slightly, moving faster through danger zones reduces exposure time but also exhausts everyone more quickly. Rest stops are shorter and more tense, with guards positioned at the perimeter and everyone told to stay alert. The casual conversation that characterized earlier parts of the journey has died down. Everyone's scanning the horizon, jumping at shadows, wound tight with anticipation of violence that may or may not come. Around midday, you crest a rise and see something that makes your blood run cold. Burned out wreckage of what was clearly another caravan, probably attacked within the past few days based on the still dark ash and the circling scavenger birds. The caravan leader calls a brief halt to investigate, and you watch as scouts examine the scene. There are bodies, or what's left of them after animals and elements did their work. Goods are scattered and smashed, indicating the attackers took what they wanted and destroyed what they couldn't carry. This is your first real confrontation with the fact that caravan travel has a body count, and you could very easily become one of those anonymous dead if luck turns against you. The mood after passing that massacre site is grim and silent. Everyone's doing their own mental calculations about risk and reward, whether the profits from this journey are worth potentially ending up as scattered bones in the desert. For many medieval traders, the answer was yes. The profit margins on successful long-distance trade were astronomical, sometimes 1,000% or more, which made even high risk acceptable. But you're not getting rich from this. You're just trying to survive. And the risk-reward calculation looks very different when you're the expendable labor rather than the merchant standing to profit. Historians still argue whether most caravans traveled without incident or if attacks were common enough to significantly impact trade routes. The truth is probably regional and temporal. Some routes and periods were relatively safe with strong governmental control, while others were essentially lawless zones where only large, well-armed caravans dared travel. The Silk Road had periods of Pax Mongolica where Mongol rule made attacks rare, but also periods of fragmentation where every mountain pass had its own warlord demanding tribute. You're experiencing one of the more dangerous periods. Lucky you, and the constant vigilance is exhausting in ways that physical exertion alone isn't. As afternoon wears on, you spot actual riders in the distance, and this time they're definitely real three figures on horses, paralleling the caravan's route but maintaining distance. The guards immediately signal alert, and the entire caravan responds with practiced efficiency that suggests this isn't their first encounter. The column tightens up. Vulnerable individuals moved toward the center, guards positioning themselves at the edges with weapons ready. Everyone keeps moving because stopping would signal fear and vulnerability, but the pace slows slightly to maintain formation coherence. The riders keep pace for about an hour, never approaching but never leaving either. This is a scouting behavior theory assessing the caravan's strength. Counting guards, looking for weaknesses or stragglers. If they decide the caravan is too strong to attack directly, they'll either leave or follow at distance, hoping someone falls behind or the caravan becomes vulnerable through circumstances. If they think they can take you, they'll go get reinforcements and come back. Either way, those riders now know exactly where you are, how many you are, and what kind of resistance they'd face. The knowledge that you're being evaluated for potential robbery and murder is deeply unsettling. Eventually, the riders veer off and disappear behind terrain features, and everyone breathes slightly easier, but nobody relaxes. They could be leaving, or they could be circling around to get ahead of the caravan, or they could be reporting back to a larger group. The caravan leader decides to push through dusk rather than make camp at the usual time, trying to put distance between the caravan and the potential threat. This means more walking when you're already exhausted, but nobody argues because everyone understands the logic. Tired is better than dead. Night falls, and the caravan finally stops, but security is dramatically increased. Guards are posted in shifts around the perimeter. Fires are kept small to avoid advertising your position, and everyone sleeps in full formation rather than spreading out comfortably. You're told in no uncertain terms that if there's an alarm during the night, you're to grab your belongings and move to the center of camp immediately. No wandering off, no hesitation. The camp is silent except for necessary whispers, and you realize that even sleep is now a defensive activity, part of a collective survival strategy where individual comfort is completely subordinate to group security. You try to sleep, but your nervous system won't cooperate. Every sound wind against canvas, an animal shifting position, someone coughing jolts you partially awake. Heart pounding, certain that the attack is beginning. The guards are walking the perimeter, and each time one passes near you, you startle, then feel foolish for startling, then can't fall back asleep because the adrenaline dump has you wired. This is exactly what chronic stress does to the human body. Keeps you in a perpetual state of semi-alert exhaustion that degrades your health, your judgment, and your ability to recover from the physical demands of travel. The historical reality is that many travelers were indeed attacked, and the outcomes varied wildly. Some bandits were surprisingly professional. They'd take a negotiated portion of goods as taxes and let the caravan continue relatively unmolested. This was sustainable banditry, ensuring future caravans would still attempt the route and provide future opportunities for extraction. Other groups were simply violent opportunists who took everything and left no witnesses. Caravan leaders sometimes paid regular tribute to local strongmen or tribal groups to ensure safe passage through their territories, which was barely distinguishable from government taxation in practice. The line between legitimate authority and organized crime was very blurry in areas without strong central control. There's also the insider threat that nobody talks about openly but everyone's aware of. Caravans included strangers traveling together for weeks or months, and not everyone could be trusted. Theft within the caravan happened. Goods would go missing, usually blamed on mysterious circumstances but probably taken by fellow travelers. Occasionally, someone in the caravan was feeding information to bandits, providing details about goods, defenses, and routes in exchange for a cut of the raid's profits. The paranoia wasn't just about external threats. It was about trusting the people sleeping 3 feet away from you, who you don't know and who might see you as an obstacle to their profit rather than a fellow traveler. You're lying awake in the darkness, every muscle tense, and you realize that this psychological torture is going to continue for the entire journey. There's no point where you can fully relax. No safe zone where the threat of violence disappears. You'll walk every day scanning the horizon for danger. You'll sleep every night in formations designed for defense. You'll make decisions constantly about whether to help a fellow traveler or prioritize your own survival. The bandits don't even have to attack to win. They've already stolen your peace of mind, your rest, your ability to exist without constant fear. And that might be their most effective weapon of all. Because exhausted, paranoid travelers make mistakes. And mistakes in this environment are often fatal. Morning breaks with the smell hitting you first, that distinctive, pungent combination of wet fur, dung, and something vaguely sour that you've come to associate with the caravan's animal companions. You've been so focused on your own suffering that you haven't fully appreciated just how much the animals on this journey are responsible for keeping everyone alive, and also how much they absolutely, categorically hate every moment of existence. Welcome to working with medieval pack animals, creatures that are simultaneously biological miracles and temperamental nightmares that would kill you if they had the cognitive capacity to plan murder. The camels are up first because camels are always the loudest complainers in any group. If you've never heard a camel's protest roar up close, imagine a foghorn having an argument with a dying accordion while someone simultaneously strangles a goose. It's a sound that vibrates in your chest and makes you question whether this animal is suffering or just deeply, personally offended by the concept of labor. The handlers are moving through the herd, checking loads from yesterday, adjusting straps, and taking verbal abuse from animals that seem to have perfected the art of making their displeasure known. Camels, you're learning, are drama queens of the highest order despite their reputation as hardy desert ships. Yes, they can go days without water by metabolizing fat stored in their humps, not water. That's a myth, but fat that converts to energy and metabolic water. Yes, they can carry 400 to 600 pounds depending on the individual and breed. Yes, they're adapted to extreme temperatures and can eat thorny vegetation that would shred other animals' mouths. But they're also capable of holding grudges, spitting with alarming accuracy, biting with intent to maim, and kicking in directions their body structure suggests shouldn't be anatomically possible. You're watching a handler approach his camel to load it for the day's journey, and the animal immediately tries to bite him. The handler expects this carrying a stick and uses it to redirect the attempted bite while simultaneously making clicking sounds and speaking in what you assume are camel endearments or possibly threats. The camel roars its displeasure but eventually allows itself to be loaded, though not without attempting to step on the handler's foot and succeeding in landing a glancing kick to his shin. The handler barely reacts, suggesting this is just Tuesday in the world of camel management. You're asked to help with another camel, and you approach cautiously, remembering your attempted interaction from day one. This camel takes one look at you and decides violence is the answer. It swings its massive head toward you, mouth open, displaying teeth that look far too large and sharp for an herbivore. You jump back, and everyone within visual range laughs at your panic because apparently your fear is entertainment. The handler takes over, demonstrating the proper approach from the side, never head-on, with confident movements that telegraph your intentions. Camels can sense hesitation and fear, and they respond to uncertainty with aggression because in their world, you're either in charge or you're prey. You try again with a different camel, and this time you manage to help secure part of a load without getting bitten, which feels like a genuine achievement even though everyone else does this with zero fanfare. The horses and oxen present different challenges. Horses are faster and more prestigious. The caravan leader and wealthier merchants ride them, but they require more water and food than camels and are less suited to extreme desert conditions. You watch a merchant's horse being saddled, and it's a beautiful animal that probably cost more than you'd earn in a year of labor, but it's also clearly stressed by the journey. Its coat is dull. There are rub marks where the saddle and bridle have been chafing, and it's standing with a hip cocked in a way that suggests fatigue. Medieval horses didn't have modern veterinary care or scientifically optimized nutrition. They worked until they couldn't, and then they either recovered or died, and the caravan moved on either way. The oxen are the workhorses of cargo transport, slow, steady, unglamorous animals that can pull carts if the terrain allows or carry pack loads where wheeled vehicles can't go. They're less temperamental than camels, which is to say they'll comply with human direction without actively trying to murder you, but they're also stubborn in ways that require patience you don't have. You watch an ox handler spending 20 minutes coaxing an ox to move from its resting spot to its position in the caravan line. The ox is simply standing there, chewing cud, completely ignoring increasingly urgent commands. Eventually, physical persuasion in the form of a stick applied to the rear end gets the animal moving. But it's a reminder that these aren't machines you can switch on. Theory, living creatures with their own agendas, and sometimes their agenda is stand here and do nothing. Here's a historical detail that's both fascinating and horrifying. The mortality rate for pack animals on long caravan journeys was substantial. Animals died from exhaustion, dehydration, disease, accidents, and sometimes from being slaughtered for food when provisions ran low. A caravan that started with 100 camels might arrive with 85 or 90, the losses accepted as a cost of doing business. The dead animals would be stripped of anything valuable, their loads redistributed, hides and meat salvaged if possible, and the caravan would continue. You're going to witness animal death on this journey, and it's going to be neither quick nor pleasant. And nobody's going to be particularly emotional about it because these are economic assets, not pets. The animals are also disease vectors that you're in constant close contact with. Fleas, ticks, and other parasites jump freely between animals and humans. Camels can carry diseases transmissible to humans, brucellosis, for instance, which causes fever and joint pain and could make you miserable for months. Horses can kick you hard enough to break bones or kill you outright, and they do so with some regularity when startled or mistreated. Oxen can gore you with their horns if they decide you're threatening. The historical record includes plenty of caravan casualties that weren't from bandits or weather but from animals having bad days and taking it out on nearby humans. The smell is worth revisiting because it's truly something special. Dozens of large mammals, all working hard, all producing prodigious amounts of waste, all sweating, yes, even camels sweat, though less than horses, creates an olfactory environment that's nearly solid. You're walking behind these animals for hours each day, and they're producing manure at regular intervals that you're either stepping around or occasionally stepping in. Your shoes are caked with dung. Your clothes have been splashed by urine when an animal decided to relieve itself while you were walking too close. You smell like you've been living in a barn, because you essentially have been, and there's no escaping it because the animals are the center around which the entire caravan revolves. Feeding and watering the animals is a major logistical challenge that impacts every decision the caravan makes. Camels can go several days without water, but they can't go forever, and when they do drink, they consume 20 to 30 gallons in one session. Horses need water daily. Oxen need water and grazing. The caravan's route is dictated not by the shortest distance between cities, but by the locations of water sources and grazing areas sufficient to support the animal herd. Sometimes this means significant detours or traveling through less than ideal terrain because that's where the animals can be sustained. The animals' needs trump human preferences every time, because without the animals, the goods don't move, and if the goods don't move, everyone's wasting their time. You're present when the caravan reaches a well around midday, and you witness the controlled chaos of watering dozens of thirsty animals. There's a hierarchy: the most valuable animals drink first, then everyone else, then humans get whatever's left. You watch camels drinking with this wet, slurping sound that goes on and on as they tank up for the next stretch. They're consuming gallons while you're waiting for your turn with a water skin that holds maybe a quart. The inequity is stark, but it's also logical from a survival standpoint. The animals are more valuable than you are in the cold calculus of caravan economics. If water is limited and choices must be made, the animals drink and you go thirsty because the caravan can replace you more easily than it can replace a trained pack camel. The handlers have relationships with their animals that are complex and not particularly sentimental. They know each animal's personality, its quirks, its physical weaknesses. They can tell when a camel is going lame before visible signs appear, when a horse is developing colic, when an ox is about to give up entirely. This knowledge is practical, not emotional. They need the animals to perform, and recognizing problems early prevents catastrophic failures on the trail. But there's also a bond formed through daily contact, through shared hardship. You see a handler carefully checking his camel's feet for stones or injuries, speaking softly to the animal while it grumbles, and there's something almost tender in the interaction despite the general atmosphere of utilitarian brutality. Historians still argue whether medieval people had the same emotional relationships with animals that modern people do, or if animals were viewed more purely as tools and resources. The truth is probably varied by individual, culture, and circumstances. Some travelers definitely cared about their animals beyond economic value. Others saw them as means to an end. You're watching the full spectrum play out: handlers who clearly have favorite animals they treat better, merchants who view their pack animals as walking inventory with no more emotional significance than the goods they carry, and everything in between. The animals are also your early warning system for dangers you can't see. They sense things before humans do: approaching predators, weather changes, unsafe ground. You notice the camels getting agitated for no apparent reason, making uneasy sounds and shifting restlessly. The handlers immediately go on alert, scanning the area, because they trust the animal's instincts. Turns out there's a pack of wild dogs shadowing the caravan at a distance, probably hoping for scraps or a chance at a weak animal. The dogs don't attack, but their presence keeps everyone tense, and the camels don't fully settle down until the dogs give up and leave hours later. This is the value of animals beyond their cargo capacity theory, aware of threats in ways that humans with our diminished senses simply aren't. You're also learning that different cultures and regions had different relationships with their pack animals, developed over centuries of practical experience. Central Asian camel handlers had techniques that differed from Arabian handlers, who differed from North African handlers. Horse breeding and training varied dramatically by region. The types of loads animals could carry, how they were secured, the distances they could cover. All of this was refined cultural knowledge passed down through generations. You're watching masters of animal husbandry practicing their craft, even if that craft involves a lot of hitting animals with sticks and shouting, because medieval animal training wasn't based on positive reinforcement psychology. It was based on dominance, routine, and the understanding that these animals were stronger than humans and needed to be convinced, sometimes forcefully, to comply. As the day wears on and you're walking beside a camel that keeps trying to bite your shoulder every time you get too close, you develop a grudging respect for these animals and the people who manage them. They're horrible, smelly, mean, unpredictable creatures that make every day harder than it needs to be. But they're also the reason this caravan exists at all. The biological engines that make long-distance trade possible in an era before motorized transport. Your modern life, with its overnight shipping and global supply chains, is built on foundations that include thousands of years of people fighting with cranky camels to move goods across impossible distances. And right now, you're part of that tradition, even if your contribution is mostly just avoiding getting bitten and trying not to step in too much dung. Which, honestly, is a victory in itself. The sun has set, and you've survived another day of walking, animal attacks, and questionable food. You're so exhausted you could sleep on broken glass, and you basically will remember that bed you had last night. Tonight's won't be any better. The caravan has stopped for the night, and you're about to discover that the concept of rest on a medieval caravan is aspirational at best and a cruel joke at worst. Nightfall doesn't mean your suffering ends. It just means different suffering begins, and you won't even get proper sleep to help you recover from it. First, there's the sleeping situation itself, which is primitive in ways that would violate every Geneva Convention if those applied to civilians volunteering for trade expeditions. You don't have a tent, those are for merchants and caravan leadership. You don't have a sleeping pad or camping mattress. You've got a thin wool blanket that's probably harboring multiple forms of life, and you're spreading it directly on rocky ground that seems specifically designed to have sharp edges positioned exactly where your hip bones and shoulders will press against them. You try to find a smooth patch of earth, but in desert or rocky terrain, smooth doesn't really exist. You're choosing between uncomfortably lumpy and actively painful, and both options guarantee you'll wake up multiple times during the night when your body can no longer tolerate the pressure points. The temperature situation at night is its own special hell. You've gone from broiling under the midday sun to shivering in the desert night, and your body cannot regulate itself effectively when you're this exhausted and dehydrated. Desert regions can experience 40 to 50 degree temperature swings between day and night, and you're facing those swings with inadequate insulation and no shelter from the wind. That thin blanket is all that stands between you and hypothermia, and it's not enough. You're curling into a tight ball, trying to minimize heat loss, but your feet are freezing, your nose is freezing, and the cold is seeping into your bones in a way that makes sleep nearly impossible. You're also surrounded by people, dozens or hundreds of them, depending on caravan size, all sleeping within a few feet of each other for security and warmth. This means you're experiencing every sound, every smell, every movement of your neighbors throughout the night. The person next to you snores like they're trying to wake the dead. Someone across the camp is coughing a deep, wet cough that suggests respiratory illness and reminds you that disease spreads enthusiastically in these close quarters. Someone else is having what sounds like a nightmare, making distressed sounds that nobody addresses because mental health isn't really a medieval concept and nightmares are just something you endure. The guard rotation is happening throughout the night, which means people are walking the perimeter, occasionally challenging shadows, keeping fires minimally stoked. Every time a guard passes near you, you partially wake, your brain's threat assessment system refusing to fully power down because you're sleeping in an environment where danger is a real possibility. This fragmented sleep is worse than no sleep in some ways. You never drop into deep restorative sleep cycles, never fully recover, just exist in this twilight state of semi-consciousness where you're neither awake nor properly asleep. Then there are the animals, who apparently don't believe in sleeping through the night. Camels make disturbing sounds at random intervals, low rumbles, sudden roars, coughing noises that sound like they're dying. Horses whinny and stamp. Oxen shift positions with these heavy, sighing sounds. Dogs, either camp dogs or wild ones at the perimeter, bark periodically at real or imagined threats. It's a full symphony of animal noises that never fully stops, and each sound pulls you a little closer to wakefulness until you're lying there, eyes closed, exhausted but unable to actually sleep. Your body is also staging multiple protests simultaneously. Those blisters on your feet, they're throbbing with your heartbeat, sending pain signals that won't let you forget them. Your sunburned skin is tight and hot, radiating heat uncomfortably. Your muscles are locked up in knots from the day's exertion, and there's no massage therapist, no hot bath, no muscle relaxant to help them release. Every time you try to shift to a more comfortable position, some new body part screams at you. Your back hates the ground. Your hips hate the rocks. Your shoulders hate everything. You cycle through positions on your side, on your back, curled up, stretched out, and none of them work for more than a few minutes before discomfort forces another shift. Around what you estimate is midnight, though time has lost all meaning, you desperately need to pee. This means getting up from your semi-warm cocoon, exposing yourself to the freezing air, stumbling to the camp perimeter in the dark while trying not to step on sleeping people or into campfires, handling your business while hoping nothing bites or stings you in your vulnerable state, and then returning to find your sleeping spot has somehow gotten even colder in your absence. The blanket feels like ice when you wrap it around yourself again, and you spend the next 20 minutes shivering violently while your body tries to rewarm itself. Any sleep progress you'd made is completely erased. Historical accounts from medieval travelers rarely discuss sleep in detail, but when they do, the picture isn't pretty. Ibn Battuta mentions exhausting nights with inadequate rest. Marco Polo describes sleeping in the open air in dangerous regions. Chinese Buddhist pilgrims traveling the Silk Road wrote about the challenges of finding safe places to sleep and the constant state of alertness required. Everyone who traveled these routes experienced what you're experiencing: chronic sleep deprivation that accumulates day after day until your cognitive function starts deteriorating and simple tasks become difficult. The guards assigned to night watch have their own misery theory, staying awake through the coldest, most uncomfortable hours, pacing to stay warm, straining their eyes in darkness to spot threats that may or may not be there. They're doing this after walking 20+ miles during the day, and they'll be walking again tomorrow with minimal rest. Guard duty rotates so everyone shares the burden, and you realize with dread that eventually your turn will come. You'll be expected to stay awake for a 4-hour shift, watching for bandits and predators, keeping fires alive, ensuring nothing goes catastrophically wrong while everyone else sleeps. You can barely stay conscious for 4 hours during the day right now. The prospect of doing it at night is terrifying. Around what might be 3 a.m., predators start making themselves known. You hear sounds in the darkness beyond the camp. Could be jackals, could be larger cats, could be hyenas depending on the region. They're attracted by food smells, by vulnerable animals, by the possibility of easy scavenging. The camp dogs are on high alert now, growling and barking, which wakes everyone up fully for several minutes of collective tension while the guards investigate. The predators don't attack the fire and numbers deter them, but they don't leave either. circling at the edges of firelight like the nightmares you can't quite escape. This is what nights were like for most of human history. Darkness full of things that want to eat you, with only fire and numbers keeping you marginally safe. When you do manage to slip into something resembling sleep, the dreams are strange and disturbing. Your exhausted brain is processing the day's traumas, creating bizarre scenarios where you're being chased by bandits riding giant camels, or you're walking forever without reaching any destination, or you're drowning in sand that tastes like the stew from dinner. You half-wake from these dreams disoriented and panicked, unsure for several seconds where you are or why everything hurts. This pattern repeats multiple times throughout the night, brief snatches of unsatisfying sleep interrupted by discomfort, noise, cold, or disturbing dreams. The stars are incredible when you're lying there unable to sleep. The night sky in regions without light pollution is a sight that modern city dwellers never experience. You can see the Milky Way as a cloudy band across the sky, countless stars sharp and bright, planets visible as colored points. Medieval travelers used these stars for navigation, telling time, religious observances. You're just staring at them because you can't sleep and there's something to focus on besides your discomfort. There's a beauty to it that would be more appreciated if you weren't so cold, sore, and exhausted that existence itself feels like punishment. Historians still argue whether medieval people needed less sleep than modern humans or just functioned perpetually sleep-deprived. The answer is probably the latter. They survived on inadequate sleep because they had no choice. Their bodies adapted as much as possible, and the ones who couldn't adapt either didn't travel or died along the way. You're experiencing the brutal selection pressure that ensured only the hardiest individuals completed these journeys repeatedly. Sleep deprivation impairs judgment, slows reaction times, weakens immune response, and increases accident risk, all dangerous in caravan environments where alertness is survival. Around what must be 5 a.m., you finally slip into deeper sleep. Your body so exhausted it overrides all the discomfort signals and just shuts down. This is the worst possible timing because you get maybe 45 minutes of actual restorative rest before the camp starts waking up for the dawn departure. People are moving around, talking in low voices, starting to pack up and load animals. You're pulled from the only decent sleep you've gotten in days, and the disorientation and resentment are overwhelming. Your body feels heavier than lead. Your brain is wrapped in fog, and the prospect of another day of walking seems genuinely impossible. You force yourself upright, every muscle screaming objections, and you realize you've gotten maybe 3 hours of genuinely restful sleep in the past 48 hours. This is your baseline now. This is every night, week after week of inadequate sleep, never fully recovering, operating at a constant deficit that makes everything harder. Your immune system is weakening. Your mental health is deteriorating. Your body is consuming itself for energy because you're not eating enough to replace what you're burning. You're essentially in a slow-motion medical emergency, but so is everyone else, and it's just considered normal. The cold morning air hits you as you roll up your blanket, and you're immediately shivering again, sleep-deprived body unable to regulate temperature effectively. Around you, the caravan is coming to life with the same chaotic energy as yesterday. People and animals preparing for another day of the same grinding routine. You thought you'd adapt, that each day would get easier as your body adjusted. But sleep deprivation ensures you never fully adapt. You just get progressively more broken down, surviving through sheer stubbornness and the knowledge that stopping means being left behind. Welcome to night after medieval night, where rest is theoretical and suffering is the only constant. and you've got potentially months more of this ahead before reaching any destination. Sweet dreams? There's no such thing out here. There's only survival until dawn. You're 5 days into this journey now, moving through the morning routine with the mechanical efficiency of someone whose soul has partially departed their body. When you commit your first major social violation, you accidentally look a senior merchant directly in the eye while he's speaking to someone else, and the immediate shift in atmosphere tells you that you've done something terribly wrong. Welcome to the final and perhaps most psychologically exhausting aspect of caravan life. The invisible web of social hierarchy, cultural codes, and unspoken rules that govern every interaction, and which you, as a time-displaced outsider, are violating constantly without even realizing it. The merchant's response is immediate and harsh, a verbal dressing down in a language you barely understand, but the tone of contempt is universal. The people around you aren't defending you. They're nodding in agreement that you've been disrespectful. You've just learned that eye contact rules vary dramatically by culture and status, and as a low-ranking laborer, you're apparently supposed to keep your gaze downcast in the presence of your betters. This isn't something anyone explained to you because it's so fundamentally obvious to everyone else that it doesn't need explanation. You're expected to absorb the social rules through observation, and failure to do so marks you as stupid, disrespectful, or both. The social stratification on this caravan is rigid in ways that would make a caste system seem flexible. At the top is the caravan leader, whose authority is absolute and unchallengeable. Below him are the senior merchants, men who own the most valuable goods and command respect through wealth and experience. Then come the regular merchants, handlers with specialized skills, religious figures who occupy their own category, hired guards, general laborers, and at the very bottom, people like you unskilled workers, foreigners, anyone without connections or resources. Your position in this hierarchy determines everything. How much food you get, where you sleep relative to fires and protection, whether anyone listens when you speak, even whether you receive help if you're injured or sick. You're learning the communication protocols through painful trial and error. When a merchant addresses you, you're expected to respond immediately and deferentially, using whatever honorific is culturally appropriate, master or sir, or specific titles that vary by region and culture. When you have a question or need, you can't approach leadership directly. You go through intermediaries, following chains of command that seem designed to remind you constantly of your lowly status. Direct requests are seen as presumptuous. You're supposed to wait to be addressed, to offer service before it's requested, to anticipate needs without being told. These are skills that medieval servants learned from childhood, and you're trying to pick them up in real time while exhausted and disoriented. The ethnic and religious diversity on the caravan creates additional layers of complexity. You've got Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, followers of various local religions, all traveling together out of economic necessity but maintaining distinct social groups. Dietary restrictions mean different cooking arrangements and careful attention to who eats what. Prayer schedules vary. You hear the Muslim call to prayer 5 times daily. See Christian travelers making the sign of the cross before meals. Buddhist monks chanting at dawn. Religious tensions simmer beneath the surface of pragmatic cooperation. You've accidentally violated some religious boundary you didn't know existed. Maybe you touched something considered unclean, or stepped where you shouldn't have, or spoke during a moment that required silence, and suddenly people who were neutral toward you are now actively hostile. Language barriers compound every problem. The caravan includes speakers of Arabic, Persian, various Turkic languages, Chinese dialects, and regional tongues you can't even identify. Most traders have picked up enough of a common language, maybe a trade pidgin or Arabic, as a lingua franca to conduct business. But nuanced communication is nearly impossible. You're trying to learn key phrases, but without immersion teaching or language apps, you're acquiring vocabulary at a painfully slow rate through context clues and embarrassing mistakes. You've said things you thought were polite that turned out to be insults. You've used the wrong pronoun form and offended someone's honor. You've mispronounced words in ways that changed their meanings from harmless to obscene. The merchants conduct their business while traveling, and watching these negotiations is like witnessing a performance art you don't understand. There are elaborate rituals of greeting, specific ways of examining goods, coded language that conveys information about prices and quality without stating anything directly. Handshakes or their cultural equivalents seal deals worth fortunes, with nothing written down because contracts are based on reputation and witnesses rather than legal documents. A merchant's word was quite literally his bond. Break it, and you'd be blacklisted from every caravan and trading post within 1,000 miles. Trust is the currency that matters most, and that trust is built through networks of family, ethnicity, religion, and previous successful transactions. As an outsider with no connections, you have zero trust capital, which means you have zero value beyond your physical labor. You watch a particularly elaborate negotiation unfold over the course of several hours while the caravan is stopped for midday rest. Two merchants are discussing silk prices, but they're doing it through this intricate dance of offers and counteroffers, compliments and veiled insults, examination of goods with theatrical skepticism followed by grudging admiration. They're drinking tea together, sharing food, asking about each other's families, and somewhere in all this social lubrication, actual business is being conducted. The final price is probably nowhere near what either party initially claimed they'd accept, but both walk away satisfied because the relationship has been maintained and honored through proper protocol. You, watching from your position as irrelevant labor, realize you could never participate in this world even if you had goods to trade, because you don't speak the cultural language that makes these transactions possible. There's also a parallel economy of favors and obligations that operates alongside monetary exchange. Someone does something for someone else, provides information about road conditions, offers a better camping spot, helps repair a broken cart, and this creates a debt that will be repaid somehow, sometime, in ways that aren't explicitly stated but are nonetheless binding. These networks of reciprocal obligation are how medieval commerce actually functioned at the practical level. The formal contracts and official deals were one thing, but the informal web of who owes whom and who can be trusted was what really kept goods moving across continents. You're outside this network entirely, which makes you not just poor but socially invisible in ways that matter more than economic poverty. You're also witnessing the darker aspects of this social system. Women on the caravan, the few that there are, occupy precarious positions. Some are merchants or merchants' wives with protected status, but others are servants or enslaved individuals with virtually no rights or protections. You see them working harder than most men, bearing loads, cooking, managing children, and receiving less food and worse treatment. Speaking to them inappropriately or even looking at them wrong can get you beaten or expelled from the caravan, depending on whose property or family they're considered to be. The gender dynamics are oppressive in ways that make your modern sensibilities recoil, but challenging these norms would mark you as dangerous and untrustworthy. One evening, you witness a woman maybe in her 30s, travel-worn and exhausted, being berated by a merchant for some minor infraction in how she prepared his meal. The verbal abuse goes on for several minutes, and she stands there taking it with her head bowed, not defending herself, not explaining, just enduring. Nobody intervenes because this is considered normal, acceptable behavior. Your modern instinct is to say something, to defend her, but you've learned enough by now to know that would only make things worse for everyone, especially her. So you do what everyone else does: you look away. You pretend you're not seeing it, and you hate yourself a little bit more for your cowardice. But survival in this environment means picking your battles, and you've got no power to fight battles on anyone's behalf. Slavery is present and accepted in ways that historical accounts sometimes gloss over, but which are impossible to ignore when you're living alongside it. There are people on this caravan who are owned by others, their labor and bodies not their own, and the casual brutality of their treatment is stomach-turning. They receive the least food, do the hardest work, sleep in the worst conditions, and face physical punishment for infractions real or imagined. You see a young man, probably in his early 20s, being struck with a stick for moving too slowly while loading a camel, and he doesn't even flinch. This is so routine for him that he's learned to just absorb the blows and keep working. The legal and religious frameworks of medieval societies provided various justifications for slavery, and travelers from cultures where it was normal had no moral qualms about it. What's particularly disturbing is how the enslaved people have internalized their positions. They're not constantly rebelling or resisting theory, performing their roles with a kind of resigned efficiency, because resistance means worse punishment and compliance might earn marginally better treatment. You realize that this is how oppressive systems maintain themselves, not through constant force, but through the gradual breaking down of people's sense that any other reality is possible. These individuals have been shaped by their circumstances into accepting the unacceptable, and you're watching the psychological mechanisms of oppression operate in real time. It's horrifying, and you want to help, to do something, but you're powerless, and any intervention would likely make things worse for everyone, including yourself. The concept of privacy doesn't exist in the way you understand it. Your belongings can be searched at any time by caravan leadership if they suspect theft or contraband. Your conversations are overheard and judged. Your bodily functions are semi-public. Your sleeping space is whatever ground you can claim in the communal camp. The only privacy is what you can create through careful positioning and timing, and even that is limited. This constant exposure means you're always performing, always aware of being watched and evaluated, never able to fully relax into yourself. It's psychologically exhausting in ways that are hard to articulate, but which grind you down day after day. You try to find a moment alone during a rest stop, walking to the edge of camp ostensibly to relieve yourself, but really just to have 60 seconds where nobody's watching you. But even this is impossible. Someone always needs to know where you're going. Make sure you're not shirking duties or stealing something or getting yourself into trouble that the caravan will have to deal with. Your autonomy has been completely stripped away, replaced by this collective existence where your individual desires and needs are irrelevant except insofar as they affect your ability to perform labor. Modern you took privacy so completely for granted, the ability to close a door, to be alone with your thoughts, to exist without observation, that you never appreciated it as the profound luxury it actually was. Historians still argue whether medieval societies were more communal and less individualistic than modern ones, or if people felt the same desire for privacy but simply had fewer opportunities to achieve it. You're experiencing the reality of constant communal living, and it's suffocating. You can't have a private thought without someone noticing you're distracted. You can't have a bad day without it being everyone's business. You can't fail at a task without it becoming social currency that defines your reputation. Every moment is performative, and the performance requirements are exhausting when you're already physically destroyed. The gossip network on the caravan is sophisticated and vicious. Information spreads through the camp faster than seems possible. Sick. Who violated what rule? Who's in conflict with whom? Which merchant is having financial problems? Which handler got drunk and said something he shouldn't have? Reputations are built and destroyed through whispered conversations and observed behaviors. You're the subject of some of this gossip. You're certain. The weird foreigner who doesn't know basic etiquette and keeps making mistakes. You catch fragments of conversations that stop when you approach. See people glancing at you and then whispering to each other. The paranoia this creates is constantly second-guessing your actions, wondering what new social crime you've committed, trying to read hostility or acceptance in glances and tones. There's one particularly vicious piece of gossip making the rounds about a merchant who allegedly cheated a customer in the last city. Whether it's true or not doesn't really matter. The story has taken on a life of its own, and you watch this man's social capital evaporating in real time. Other merchants are less friendly in their interactions with him. People are subtly distancing themselves. By the time you reach the next major settlement, he'll probably find himself unable to join future caravans or conduct business with previous partners. This is the enforcement mechanism in a world without formal legal systems. Reputation and social pressure do the work that police and courts do in modern society. It's effective, but it's also arbitrary and potentially unjust, because once a reputation is damaged, there's no appeals process or opportunity to clear your name through objective evidence. There are also surprising moments of solidarity and kindness that break through the hierarchical harshness. An older laborer shows you a better way to wrap your feet to prevent blisters, sharing knowledge without judgment. He demonstrates the technique patiently, using strips of cloth torn from an old tunic, showing you how to cover the vulnerable areas and tie it so it won't slip during the day's walk. This small act of generosity, from someone who has no obligation to help you and gains nothing from doing so, nearly brings you to tears. You've been operating in such a harsh environment for so long that basic human kindness feels overwhelming. A merchant's servant gives you extra food one evening when you're particularly hungry, a small act of generosity that risks punishment if discovered. She does it quickly, almost furtively, pressing a piece of flatbread into your hand while the merchant is occupied elsewhere. You make eye contact for just a second, and there's an understanding there. She knows what hunger feels like. She sees your suffering, and she's taking a small risk to alleviate it. You want to thank her properly, but she's already moving away, and drawing attention to the exchange would only create problems. So you eat the bread quickly, savoring every bite, and you try to send your gratitude across the space through sheer force of feeling. A fellow traveler from a completely different cultural background helps you understand a rule you were violating, explaining through gestures and broken shared vocabulary. You'd been sitting wrong during communal meals. Apparently there's a specific posture that's required, and you'd been unconsciously adopting a position that was considered disrespectful or inappropriate. He shows you the correct way, demonstrating with patience and even some humor, miming exaggerated versions of the wrong and right positions until you understand. These moments remind you that even in brutal conditions, humans find ways to help each other, But they're exceptions that prove the general rule of social Darwinism that governs most interactions. The caravan leader occasionally makes decisions that reveal the calculus of life in this environment. Someone falls seriously ill with what looks like dysentery, unable to keep food or water down, losing strength by the hour. After a brief consultation with senior merchants and perhaps a religious figure, it's decided that they'll be left at the next settlement with some money and a prayer, but the caravan won't stop or slow down for them. The economic logic is sound. One person's health can't risk the entire venture schedule, and caring for a seriously ill person would drain resources needed by everyone else. But the human cost is stark. You're watching someone being written off, abandoned because they've become a liability, and you realize with a chill that could easily be you. Your value is contingent on your ability to perform, and the moment you become more burden than benefit, you'll be cast off without ceremony or guilt. The sick person knows this too. You can see it in their eyes, the resignation mixed with terror. They're not arguing or begging, because they understand the rules as well as anyone. They're just trying to hold on until the settlement, hoping they can recover there, knowing the odds are against them. When the caravan leaves them behind, there are no tearful farewells or elaborate goodbyes. People they've traveled with for weeks just move on. Someone takes their belongings to redistribute or sell. Their spot in the walking order is filled by someone else. Within a day, it's like they never existed. This is the ultimate lesson in how little individual lives matter in the grand machinery of commerce and survival. There's also an underground economy. You're becoming aware of goods being traded between travelers outside official channels, services exchanged, favors banked for future use. Some of this is harmless. Someone with sewing skills fixes clothes in exchange for help with their heavier tasks. But some of it involves stolen goods, forbidden items, alcohol in regions where it's prohibited, religious texts that would be controversial in certain cities, possibly contraband that you don't even want to identify, things that would get everyone involved in serious trouble if discovered by authorities at the next major settlement. You're approached by someone one evening, a fellow laborer who sidles up and quietly offers to trade something wrapped in cloth. He doesn't unwrap it, doesn't say exactly what it is, just names a price in service. She wants you to take some of his guard duty shifts, a valuable commodity in the economy of exhaustion. You have to navigate whether this is a test, a trap set by caravan leadership to identify troublemakers, or a legitimate offer from someone trying to work the system. You've seen merchants glancing in your direction during this exchange, and you can't tell if they're aware and watching or just coincidentally looking your way. The wrong response could mark you as either a snitch who can't be trusted by fellow laborers or a fool who doesn't understand opportunity. Or worse, someone willing to deal in contraband who might need to be reported to authorities at the next city. You decline as neutrally as possible, saying you can't take on extra shifts in your current physical state, which is entirely true and gives you an exit without making judgments about the offer itself. The man nods and moves on, and you never find out what was in that cloth bundle. As the days wear on and your exhaustion deepens, you notice your own behavior changing in disturbing ways. You're becoming more like the people around you, harder, more cynical, quicker to judge and slower to help. When a fellow laborer stumbles and falls during the day's walk, your first instinctive thought isn't compassion but relief that it wasn't you, and a flash of irritation that the column has to slow down while they recover. You catch yourself thinking this and you're disgusted by it, but you can't deny that it was your genuine first reaction. The environment is reshaping your personality. stripping away modern humanitarian values and replacing them with medieval survival pragmatism. And you're not sure you even recognize yourself anymore. You're stealing glances at other people's food portions during meals, mentally calculating whether they're getting more than you and whether that's because of favoritism or whether you've somehow been demoted even further in the informal hierarchy. You're developing prejudices and alliances based on proximity and perceived usefulness rather than any genuine human connection. There's a guy who sleeps near you who snores terribly, and you've developed an almost pathological hatred for him. This burning resentment that's completely disproportionate to the offense. But hatred gives you something to focus on besides your own misery, and that makes it perversely valuable. You're also becoming desensitized to things that would have horrified you weeks ago. Violence and suffering that once would have demanded your intervention or at least your emotional response now just gets a mental shrug. Someone gets hit for working too slowly, you look away. An animal is being beaten with unnecessary brutality, you keep walking. A child is crying from hunger or exhaustion, you block out the sound. You're not becoming cruel exactly, but you're becoming numb, which might be worse because it's a kind of moral death that happens without you even fighting it. The person you were before this journey would judge you harshly for what you're becoming, but that person has never been this exhausted, this hungry, this constantly overwhelmed with stimuli that you can't process or respond to meaningfully. The most disturbing realization is that these social systems, as oppressive and arbitrary as they seem to you, actually work within their context. The rigid hierarchy prevents chaos when decisions need to be made quickly. Someone has to be in charge, and that person's authority has to be absolute. Or you'd have dozens of people arguing about every decision while the caravan sits stationary, burning daylight and resources. The ethnic and religious groupings provide mutual support, and security people naturally cluster with those who share language and customs because that provides a safety net in an environment where you can't rely on formal institutions. The honor codes and reputation systems create accountability when there's no formal legal structure. If breaking your word means commercial and social death, you're incentivized to keep your word more effectively than any police force could manage. The casual brutality keeps people in line and discourages the kind of individualistic behavior that could endanger the group. You hate it, your modern values recoil from it, but you can't deny that caravans using these systems successfully crossed continents for centuries, moving goods and people despite obstacles that would seem insurmountable to modern sensibilities. These weren't failed societies, they were functional ones that operated under different premises than modern liberal democracies. Understanding this doesn't make you accept the injustices you're witnessing, but it does make you realize that your modern ethical framework might not be the universal human standard you'd always assumed it was. Different conditions create different moral systems, and what works in a world of abundance and institutions might not work in a world of scarcity and chaos. As evening approaches and the caravan makes camp again, you're practicing the deferential behaviors you've learned, keeping your eyes down, speaking only when addressed, trying to become invisible except when your labor is needed. You respond to orders with the proper honorifics. You position yourself in the social space appropriate to your rank. You read the subtle signals that tell you when to approach and when to stay away. You've been broken down and partially rebuilt according to medieval social norms. And while you haven't fully internalized them, some part of your modern consciousness still rebels, and Judge CVE learned enough to reduce the frequency of violations that mark you as other. You're still foreign, still struggling, still at the bottom of the hierarchy, but you're learning the language of survival in a social ecosystem that has zero tolerance for individualism or ignorance. And that education, paid for in humiliation and exhaustion, and the gradual erosion of your sense of self, is the real price of passage through a medieval world where your modern assumptions about dignity, rights, and human value simply don't apply. You're just another body, another pair of hands, measured entirely by your utility and compliance. If you can't adapt to that reality, the caravan will leave you behind without a second thought, and some other desperate soul will take your place in the walking order, learning the same brutal lessons you're learning now. This is what survival looks like when the safety nets of modern civilization are stripped away, and it's far uglier and more morally complicated than you ever imagined from the comfort of your previous life. The weeks have blurred together now, each day a repetition of the last with minor variations in misery. You're lying under the stars on what might be the 30th or 40th night you've lost count. Time has become meaningless in this cycle of walking and sleeping and walking again. Your body has changed in ways both obvious and subtle. You're thinner, harder. Your muscles have reorganized themselves around the specific demands of walking 20 miles daily with inadequate nutrition. Your feet have developed calluses thick enough that you can barely feel the ground anymore, layers of dead skin protecting the raw tissue beneath. Your face is leather brown from constant sun exposure, etched with lines that weren't there before, making you look a decade older than your actual age. You've become what you needed to become to survive a medieval traveler, adapted to conditions that would have destroyed the person you were when this journey started. That person seems impossibly soft and naive now, someone who complained about minor inconveniences and thought they understood hardship because they'd had a difficult day at work or skipped a meal. You almost can't remember what it felt like to live in that cushioned world of climate control and abundant food and the assumption that tomorrow would be basically like today. The transformation has been so gradual that you didn't notice it happening. But looking back across the weeks of travel, you realize you've been fundamentally changed in ways that might never fully reverse. The stars above are wheeling slowly through their eternal dance, the same stars that medieval travelers watched from this same ground centuries ago, and that other travelers will watch centuries into the future. There's something oddly comforting in that continuity, in knowing that your suffering, as intense as it feels, is just one tiny thread in an enormous tapestry of human movement and commerce that spans all of history. People have always traveled, always suffered, always pushed themselves beyond reasonable limits in pursuit of trade, knowledge, pilgrimage, or simply because staying still wasn't an option. You're part of that ancient story now, connected across time to every other person who looked up at these same constellations and wondered if they'd survive to see their destination. The camp is quieter tonight than usual, a peaceful exhaustion settling over everyone like a blanket. The animals are restful, their complaints reduced to occasional soft sounds rather than the usual cacophony. The guards are walking their rounds without incident, their footsteps steady and reassuring rather than alert with tension. For once, there's no immediate threat or crisis demanding attention, no storm approaching, no suspected bandits shadowing the caravan, no internal conflicts erupting into violence. It's just a night like countless others, unremarkable in its ordinariness, which makes it precious beyond measure after weeks of constant stress. Your body still hurts, it always hurts. That's become your baseline normal, but the pain has changed character. It's no longer the sharp, shocking agony of the first days when everything was new damage. Now it's a deeper, more comprehensive ache, the kind that comes from chronic stress and insufficient recovery rather than acute injury. You're not fighting it anymore, not tensing against it or trying to will it away. You're just acknowledging it and moving forward anyway, which is perhaps the most important lesson this journey has taught you. Pain doesn't have to stop you. Discomfort doesn't have to be resolved before you can function. Suffering can just be a background condition of existence that you work around rather than something that requires immediate solution. Tomorrow you'll wake before dawn and walk again. Your feet will hurt. You'll be hungry and thirsty. The sun will assault you and the animals will be difficult, and you'll navigate a social minefield with every interaction. The food will be barely adequate and taste like nothing. The water will be warm and slightly off. Your body will protest every mile of the journey. But you'll do it because you've done it every day until now, and because the alternative, giving up, stopping, declaring yourself unable to continue, isn't actually an option when you're days or weeks from the nearest settlement in any direction. The caravan moves forward, and you move with it, one step and then another, in the rhythm that has carried travelers across impossible distances since the beginning of human commerce. There's a strange satisfaction in this absolute simplicity of purpose. You wake, you walk, you survive the day, you sleep. No complex decisions, no competing priorities, no analysis paralysis about what you should be doing with your life. The path is literal, it's the trail ahead of you, and you follow it because everyone else is following it. And together you're moving toward a destination that will eventually, theoretically, arrive. Modern life gave you infinite choices and left you perpetually uncertain whether you were making the right ones. Medieval caravan life gives you zero choices and a clarity of purpose that's almost meditative in its simplicity. You're not sure which is actually better, which says something disturbing about the complexity of modern existence. The caravan has become your entire world in a way that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced this kind of total immersion. The people around you, even the ones you don't like, are intimately familiar. You know their walking rhythms, their habits, the sounds they make when sleeping, their positions in both the physical and social hierarchies. The landscape sliding past day after day has a character and personality you've learned to read for dangers and resources. The animals are individuals with distinct temperaments you've memorized out of self-preservation. You've developed a kind of situational expertise about caravan life that would be completely useless anywhere else, but which here makes the difference between survival and failure. You've also developed a profound respect for the people who did this repeatedly, who made caravan travel their profession or regular practice. The merchants who made this journey dozens of times across their careers. The professional guides who knew every water source and dangerous pass. The handlers who managed temperamental animals year after year. These weren't extraordinary people in the sense of being superhuman. They were just ordinary humans who adapted to extraordinary demands through repeated exposure and accumulated knowledge. They probably didn't think of themselves as heroes or adventurers. They were just doing their jobs, making a living, surviving day to day in the economic reality of their era. But their resilience and competence was genuinely remarkable in ways that modern people, insulated from environmental demands, can barely comprehend. The night air is cooling, that distinctive temperature drop that happens in the hours before dawn, and you pull your blanket tighter around yourself. The wool is scratchy and probably still infested despite your efforts to shake it out, but it's yours. It's familiar, and it provides just enough warmth to make sleep possible. These small comforts, a blanket, a bit of food, water even if it tastes bad, the absence of immediate danger feel like luxuries after weeks of genuine hardship. Your standards have been completely recalibrated. Things that would have seemed like deprivation before now seem like abundance. A full day without walking feels like a vacation. A meal that's merely bland rather than actively unpleasant seems delicious. The ability to sleep 4 hours without interruption feels like a gift from the universe. This recalibration is probably the most valuable thing you'll take from this experience if you survive and knowledge that human adaptability is nearly infinite. That comfort is relative. That what you think you need to survive is vastly more than what you actually need. Modern life convinced you that you needed a specific temperature range, particular foods, certain amenities, regular entertainment, constant stimulation. Medieval caravan life has taught you that you actually need very little, enough calories to function, enough water to avoid organ failure, minimal protection from environmental extremes, and the determination to keep going despite everything. Everything else is preference, not necessity, and understanding that difference is strangely liberating even as you desperately miss all those preferences. Your breathing is slowing now, deepening, as sleep finally comes to claim you despite the rocks beneath your back and the cold seeping through your blanket and the various discomforts that would have kept you awake weeks ago. Your body has learned to sleep in conditions that would have seemed impossible before, because it has no choice. Either sleep now under these conditions or don't sleep at all. And after enough nights, your nervous system accepts the terms and shuts down for whatever rest it can extract from the situation. The last thought that drifts through your mind before unconsciousness takes you is that you understand now, in a way no book or documentary could ever teach, what it meant to travel in the medieval world. It meant suffering that never quite ends, a constant baseline of discomfort punctuated by moments of acute crisis. It meant endurance that you didn't know you possessed until circumstances demanded it and you either found it or died. It meant radical dependence on other people despite not particularly liking or trusting them, because survival required cooperation even when relationships were strained or hostile. It meant accepting that your life had minimal value in the grand economic calculations of commerce, that you were expendable and would be expended if necessary. It meant stripping away every modern assumption about rights and dignity and fair treatment and learning to function in a social environment that was fundamentally hierarchical and often brutal. But it also meant a strange pride in simply surviving another day in a world that doesn't care whether you live or die. Every sunrise you witness is a small victory. Every mile covered is an achievement. Every night you survive to sleep again is proof of your resilience. Modern life rarely offers this kind of clear feedback. You can go years without knowing whether you're actually capable of handling genuine hardship because you're never tested. Medieval caravan life tests you constantly, and passing those tests, even barely, creates a confidence that's different from modern self-esteem. It's not based on achievements or accomplishments or other people's recognition. It's based on the simple fact that you're still here, still functioning, still putting one foot in front of the other despite every reason to quit. And somehow, impossibly, you've done it. You've lasted more than a day. You've lasted weeks, maybe months depending on the route. You've become part of the caravan, part of the ancient story of human movement across hostile landscapes in pursuit of something better on the horizon. Even if that something is just survival itself, even if you never quite reach any final destination that makes all the suffering worthwhile. The journey has become the point, not because you've achieved some Zen enlightenment about process over outcomes, but because the journey is all there is. Tomorrow you'll walk again, and the day after that, and the day after that, until eventually the caravan reaches a city and you can collapse into whatever comes next. The stars blur and fade as your eyes close, and the last sounds you hear are the camp settling into its uneasy rest, the guards' footsteps crunching on gravel, the animals breathing, camels rumbling softly, horses sighing, oxen chewing cud with methodical persistence. The wind is moving across terrain that has watched countless caravans come and go, carrying their precious cargo of goods and dreams and stubborn human determination into the darkness. Always forward, always onward, generation after generation of travelers walking these same paths in an unbroken chain stretching back to the first humans who ever thought to carry things from one place to another for trade or survival. You're part of that chain now, another link in the endless sequence of people who chose or were forced to leave safety and comfort behind to venture into uncertainty. Your modern context is different, but the fundamental experience, the exhaustion, the fear, the small victories, the grinding persistence required to continue when everything in you wants to stop, that's universal across time. The medieval travelers who crossed the Silk Road or the Sahara or the European trade routes would recognize what you're feeling right now, would understand your mix of misery and pride and determination and surrender to circumstances beyond your control. Sleep now, traveler. You've earned it through every painful step, every hungry night, every moment of fear and cold and exhaustion that you've endured and survived. And tomorrow, when the dawn comes too soon and someone shakes you awake and the suffering begins again, you'll rise and walk and endure, because that's what travelers do. That's what they've always done across every century and continent where humans have moved goods and ideas and themselves across hostile distances in defiance of every reasonable limit. And now, for better or worse, that's what you do too. You're a medieval traveler now, shaped by forces older than civilization itself, connected to every other person who ever pushed beyond comfort into endurance, who ever chose continued forward motion over surrender to circumstance. The modern world you came from seems impossibly distant, almost imaginary in its comforts and conveniences. This the cold ground, the uncertain future, the body that hurts but continues anyway. This is real in ways that render everything else abstract. And somewhere in that brutal reality, you found something you didn't know you were looking for. The knowledge that you can survive things you thought would break you, that humans are stronger and more adaptable than our comfortable lives ever reveal, that the line between who you thought you were and who you can become is far more fluid than you ever imagined. The darkness deepens, your consciousness fading into the dreamless sleep of total exhaustion. And the caravan rests as it has rested on countless nights before, as it will rest on countless nights ahead. An eternal cycle of movement and rest and movement again that will continue long after you and everyone else currently traveling has turned to dust. But tonight, you're here. You're alive. You survived another impossible day in an impossible journey. And that's enough. That has to be enough. Because it's all there is, and somehow, miraculously, terribly, it is enough. Sweet dreams, traveler. May your sleep be deep and your rest sufficient to face whatever tomorrow brings. And when you wake, when the cold dawn comes and the caravan stirs and the animals complain and another day of suffering begins, may you find again that stubborn spark that's kept you going this far, that refuses to surrender despite every rational reason to quit, that carries you forward step by painful step toward whatever destination awaits at the end of this ancient, endless road.